That's funny.
Christy is showing.
All right, we got a thumbs up from Sam. All right, we're going to call the meeting to order. Welcome everybody to the first meeting in February. We're here today on February 7th, 2023. Thank you for being here. I'm going to open up request a motion to go into a closed session. Brad.
I move that the board go into closed session for the purpose of discussing the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual and collective bargaining.
All right.
Second.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Brian. Any discussion for the motion? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and go through a roll call vote, starting with board member Sika.
Jenny Sika, yes.
Ashley Anderson, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Mohammed, yes.
Brian Jensen, yes.
Christy Spett, yes.
Bryce Williams, yes.
All right. Thank you so much for that. We'll go ahead and close the room and make sure that we have a thumbs up from Sam relative to the YouTube element of our meetings.
You guys would step out for just a few minutes?
All right, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Welcome to the open session of our meeting after our closed session, and for allowing us the time to discuss the business that we need to do there. I'd like to acknowledge some of our guests. We have our SLEA representative, Mike, who's representing SLEA. Thank you. And James. Oh, there he is. He's blended in with the yeah.
Behind mine.
Excellent. I'd also like to acknowledge our SLCSD representatives in the back. Hello. Janelle Rodriguez, and then of course all of our classified representatives who might be watching from home this evening as well. And then thank you all for joining us. We'd like to turn it over to April Johnson, who's going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you, April.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Moving on to item number 3 of our opening items, we have a recognition. I'd like to invite Yandri Chatwin up to the table. Thank you, Yandri.
Yes, of course. Good evening, everybody. I have the privilege of sharing a few things about Black History Month. So during Black History Month, we celebrate the lives and legacies of Black Americans and their contributions to our country and our society. While we should all celebrate Black History every month, this dedicated time gives us the chance to remember, to share, and to embrace the influence of Black heritage and culture here in the U.S. And for us, specifically here in Utah and in Salt Lake, there had been attempts since the 1920s to recognize the contributions of Black Americans, but starting in 1976, every president has declared the month of February as National Black History Month. Now, all of us know that this country was founded on the idea that everybody, all people, are created equal, and all of us should be treated equally throughout our lives. But history teaches us that has not always been the case. And while things have improved, it is up to us here as leaders in the Salt Lake City School District to make sure that every one of our 1,000 students who identifies as African American has access to every educational opportunity that this district has to offer them, and to make sure that they have an environment where they can learn and develop their incredible abilities. Here in Utah, census data show us that 1.5% of our population overall identifies as Black. And while the community may not be large in numbers, its growing influence is felt in many sectors in our society, from business to religious leaders. It's incredible that our youth have the opportunity to see elected officials at local levels, at state levels, to see business leaders, community leaders who look like them, and that's something that's incredibly important. Part of celebrating Black History Month for us as educational leaders means that we need to do what we can to inform ourselves, to educate ourselves, to understand the Black experience, Black lived experience, so that we can then do everything that we can to understand the Black educational experience. And I wanted to just leave you with a few words from a young woman named Amanda Gorman, who made history last year as our inaugural poet in 2 years ago. I keep thinking it's still 2022. She made history by becoming our first inaugural poet, and she recited some words. I've just taken a little bit from that because it was a lengthier speech and really beautiful, but I encourage you to look it up if you have time. She said, "We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms and notions of what just isn't always justice. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny Black girl, descended from slaves and raised by a single mother, can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge a union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out arms to one another. In this truth, in this faith we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left with. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it."
Thank you, Yandri, for helping us celebrate the significance of this month. Moving along to our consent agenda, I would open it up to the board for a motion, and have since learned that we do not need to read every single item under the consent agenda unless there are items that need to be pulled and discussed more clearly.
I can make that motion.
Thank you.
I move that the board approve the items 1 through 10 on the consent agenda.
Thank you, Christy, for the motion. Is there a second? Any discussion to the motion?
I do want to have a discussion on a couple of them.
Okay.
It would be purchases accounting reports A, B, C. I don't have a lot of background. Chiller replacements. Okay, in that, Riley has a chiller that's being replaced, $334,000. Horizonte, $452,000. North Star, $352,000. That's a lot of money, and I just needed to know what our chillers? Does that go with sustainability? What? I just need some background on that.
Yeah, so the chillers are part of the HVAC system,
Okay.
and we keep them, functional because we don't want the HVAC to go down.
Okay.
Right now, we are using ESSER funds, ESSER 3 funds, to pay for these replacements because that is an allowable cost to help with the airflow of the school buildings. But normally we do replace them on a regular basis when needed because we don't want them to get old and break down. So we do preventative replacements as needed.
Okay, I appreciate that. Under, I think it was purchase orders under 50,000, it's showing that Whittier, we're doing a chiller there and it's 44,000. What's the difference?
Yeah, without looking at it exactly, I mean, I don't know right at the top of my head, but it's probably not a full replacement chiller. They're probably just doing some maintenance or something to it.
Okay,
Because you can't buy a chiller for a school for that much.
all right. I just know that right now and later on in this meeting, we're going to be looking at boundary changes and all of those. So I was just thinking, is this something that we should be considering? Are there ways that we can doctor this along while we figure out? But if we're going to lose a whole HVAC, I mean, I don't want to do that. But I mean, we're talking 1.1 million or something, and I just needed some clarification.
Thank you, Brian. Is there anything else that you wanted to? Okay. Any other discussion relative to the motion? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and do a roll call vote, starting with Board Member Anderson.
Ashley Anderson, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Mohammed, yes.
Ryan Jensen, yes.
Christy Sweat, yes.
Bryce Williams, yes.
Jenny Sika, yes.
Excellent. Thank you for that discussion, Board. And we will move on to our next agenda item, which are requests to speak. Before we invite folks up who've signed up, and thank you for signing up, I just have a little statement that the board has asked me to read before we start that portion of the agenda. So the board enjoys the opportunity to hear from the public during the public comment portion of its meetings. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to remind you of our board rules governing your comments. 1. Time may not be used to air complaints concerning building contracts, employment, or personnel issues, to criticize or defame district employees, or to make complaints for which other avenues for redress exist. Number 2, time may not be used by employees or the representatives to circumvent formal communication channels or established grievance or negotiation procedures. 3, the total time reserved for public comment is not to exceed 15 minutes, with individual presentations limited to 3 minutes and group presentations limited to 5. I'd also like to explain that unless the speaker's topic is already on the agenda, state law prohibits the board from deliberating or taking action on items raised during the public comment period. However, if it seems appropriate to the circumstances, I may direct district staff to follow up with a speaker on the topic discussed. Okay, so first on our list is Lais Martinez. Lais, are you here? Okay, I don't believe they are. We'll see if they do show up later. And so next is Briselia Lacona. Okay. Adar M is next on the list. All right. Emery Stock. Okay, Emery.
Before my time begins, does that mean I get longer? Do I get some of it?
I'm afraid not.
That was a great question.
That's a great.
Good start.
I just thought I would try. How do you measure the worth of a school? Is it in a building with state-of-the-art classrooms, test scores, graduating seniors? Do we measure the worth of a school only by the number of students enrolled using a standard algorithm devised for teacher allocation? I am here today to advocate for a decision regarding Salt Lake Virtual Elementary. It is a vital option for families in our community. I am dedicated to the idea that choice in public education should be preserved as a public good. Virtual is doing good for our community both as a choice and as an option when a child's life is affected by economical disadvantage or any other trial of life. Salt Lake City School District needs virtual to continue as an option for students. Several families have chosen our virtual setting because it is the best fit for them. With the nature of a live, synchronous environment, virtual takes educator practice into student homes. The connection between school and home is bridged. We are fortunate to witness the rich context of culture and diversity that characterizes our students' homes and families. I teach alongside parents. I see baby siblings, holiday decorations, every single pet you can imagine, and many aspects of my students' lives the teacher of a traditional classroom can't. Students in the virtual school are given safe and individualized opportunities to succeed. We are providing a service as the academic therapists many of these students desperately need. I use the term academic therapists to signify the evolving role that teachers are playing in student lives since the pandemic. We, as virtual teachers, are constantly struggling to know how best to be academic therapists to students and help them attend to and excel in their education. Many of my students receive daily personal texts and phone calls, giving them reminders and being a personal cheerleader. We as teachers are driving throughout the valley delivering schoolwork and supplies, classroom rewards, and food donations from the Utah Food Bank directly to the families in our classes on our own time. My principal, too, has traveled with us, visiting makeshift housing, often following leads to identify where missing children have gone. After we have exhausted our leads and efforts, we are following the protocol of reporting to DCFS. 1.3 million children were missing from the public school system nationally with the onset of a pandemic. Some of these children are still here living within the district, and no one else is looking for them. We are responding to each family's unique dynamics. With the online option, students are given moments to succeed not otherwise available to them in a traditional school setting. Since we maintain district pacing with the curriculum, students in unstable housing are able to attend a regular class while they are in transition.
It's time.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next on our list of speakers is Joe Landis. Okay, I'll just go ahead and see if Lais Martinez, Briselia Lacona. Okay. Okay, seeing you walked in, I was wondering, and then Adar. I don't believe that they're here, so I think we would move on to our next agenda items. Thank you so much for speaking, Emery. We appreciate the advocacy that you brought to the table this evening. Up next on our reports discussion, we have an MTSS update. Superintendent Emily?
Hello. It's good to
Hello,
see all of you.
Likewise.
As a quick introduction to this, I just wanted to remind the school board that there are two school board priorities, and one is literacy and one is social and emotional learning. And I have the priority. I just wanted to make sure I read it to you all, since I know that some of you are new to the board. And this was became a priority in November of 2018. And it says, social and emotional learning goal. In an effort to promote students' social, emotional, and academic learning, the Salt Lake City School District Board of Education will create and implement a district-wide social and emotional learning framework. So I just wanted to kind of remind you that was a priority you all set a few years back. I wanted to let you know that the framework has been written. And if anybody, I think I've probably shared that with you all, but I'm happy to share it again if you want to see the framework that we've written. And right now I've been doing, for the last couple of years, I've been doing like 3 updates to you all a year. And some of those updates have included like other MTSS information or information on House Bill 58. And I did one of these presentations in October where I discussed that the pieces of the SEL framework that I'm implementing this year are around getting 40 minutes of explicit SEL instruction in each building, and also establishing and implementing a SEL survey district-wide. And so those were the main pieces that I've been working on this year. So I wanted to kind of connect some of the reports that I've given you all with like the board priority and the October presentation I did. And then I'm hoping to do another presentation like in the late spring. So that said, we can go ahead and get started on this. All right, so I really feel like I have three main areas of my position, and one is SEL, one is MTSS, and one is Safe Schools. So I'm sharing a little bit, some updated information on each of those areas, and the first is social emotional learning. So some of the major things we've accomplished so far this year is we do have every school implementing 40 minutes of explicit SEL instruction per week. Principals have all submitted plans to me around how they're going to implement SEL, what programs they're going to use, and so on. The plans are established at the school level, and I feel really good that I feel like we've struck a nice balance between allowing autonomy at the school level and a lot of choice so that principals and teams can find plans that fit their school communities, but there's some tight expectations at the district level. We do have several district-approved curricula that schools can choose to use, and every school gave a fall SEL survey. And so we're going to go over a little bit of what kind of information we're getting from that survey also. Okay, so this is some of our preliminary data. You can see our N size is almost 15,000 students, so we've got a really nice sampling of responses. And I wanted to just mainly show you the types of information that we're getting from this survey. We've only implemented it district-wide once, so it's really hard to be able to show you all growth or areas of concern or anything like that yet, but I wanted to show you the types of things that we can see. So there's 5 competencies that we're measuring, and these are the 5 SEL competencies that are sort of central to social and emotional learning, and those are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision making. And students are rating themselves on their own skill level in these areas. We've been very transparent from the beginning about what this survey looks like, sharing it in newsletters and on websites and all sorts of things. So one of the things that we can look at are different demographics and how they've responded to this survey. So that's just one type of information. And if you look at those top bar graphs, when you see things like the green bar that says, I think 83%, what that's saying is that 83% of students with disabilities say that they either sometimes or always feel like they have that skill mastered, right? So you're seeing 83% means sometimes and always together. So this is one type of graph. If we want to go to the next one. We can also look at grade level. So this is 8th grade, and we can look at, we can choose the types of, we can disaggregate the graphs by some of those options on the side, all throughout the whole 8th grade in the district. So that's another way that we can look at the data. And the next one is by school. This happens to be West High School, and we can look at their responses specifically. You can see there's some other filters up at the top. We can look at West High 10th grade, West High 11th grade, and so on. So there's lots of filters that we can use to look at this data and how we might improve, how students are feeling about their own skills in self-awareness and self-management and so on. So again, I wanted to just show some of the types of graphs and some of the types of data that we can collect. Principals do have access to this data for their own schools and can look at this with their counselors and their teams. All right. Another thing that I'm doing, and this is a link, Sam, if you want to click on that. CASEL has a district implementation rubric that I'm using to help measure how we're doing as a district. They sort of recommend 4 different areas to focus on. And so, there's build foundational support and plan, strengthen adult SEL competencies, and so on. And so I'm like regularly rating ourselves on this rubric. I keep going back several times a year to see how we're doing in our district implementation and trying to set goals from that so that I'm measuring our own implementation against a national standard of implementation. You can go back to the slideshow. And so I measured us at the very beginning of the year in order to set some goals, and then I just measured us again as like a mid-year benchmark. And I think that we've grown from about, if you want to go one more slide, Sam, 75% to about 79%. So we are seeing growth in some of our areas along this implementation rubric. All right, so moving on to MTSS, which is multi-tiered systems of support. And just to clarify, my focus is on behavior and social and emotional learning. There's a whole academic area of MTSS that a lot of those data points and that growth is being monitored by teaching and learning. So I just want to make sure you know that MTSS includes that too. I'm just not going to focus on that in this presentation.
You have a question? I saw you.
No,
moving.
I'll wait till
Okay.
Emily's done.
Okay. Next, Sam. Okay, so some mid-year points for MTSS. So there is a large rubric called the Self-Assessment of MTSS, or the SAM, and all principals did this rubric and self-assessed their own MTSS implementation at the beginning of this year. And we have rolled out that data to principals, and they can use that data to set some of their student success plan goals for next year. We also have 8 behavior specialists, and they have, as of mid-January, they had worked with 172 individual students or teachers so far this school year. Behavior specialists have established constant communication with schools, including offering consultation hours, coaching, and professional development. And behavior specialists are offering engagement strategies, behavior addition workshops, and we actually, those are for teachers, and we have a waiting list for that. So clearly, it's in demand. All right, so I am also tracking our SAM growth, and the last time principals took the SAM was in 2019, 2020, and the way you read this graph is that in 2019, 2020, 87% of our schools ranked themselves a 1.0 or above as a total score, keeping in mind that a 1 is emerging developing on a 3-point scale. Well, 4 if you count the 0. And this year we have 95% of our schools have rated themselves in a 1.0 or above. So as you read this graph, you can see that our schools are definitely trending towards growth in each area. More of our schools are scooting into the 1.5, the 2.0, the 2.5 range. Back in 2019, 2020, we didn't have any schools ranking a 2.5 or above, and this year we are starting to see schools move themselves into that category. So we are seeing a lot of growth on this. If you click on this link, this is one that we'll have to zoom in a tiny bit. But I'm having behavior specialists track. I warned Sam. I was like, you're going to have to blow it up. We're tracking. I'm having behavior specialists track every time they reach out to schools to offer coaching or professional learning. And so as you go down here, you can see how many times our behavior specialists are reaching out to every school to initiate contact regarding professional learning and coaching. And on my version of this survey, it's kind of fun because I can hover over that bar graph and see which one is which school. And then the second, if you go down a little bit, so they've made contact with every school. And if you go down, I'm also having them track how often schools reach out to them, right? Where the school is initiating, I'd like you to come and do some professional development. And so you can see also that we have quite a few schools who are reaching out a lot for professional development and coaching from them. So this is something that we're tracking. I want to make sure we can see how often they're being used. Thanks, Sam. All right, next. Okay, and then finally, some Safe Schools updates. We have a new Safe School Specialist position, and that's allowing us to resolve a lot more cases a lot more efficiently. We're able to respond to every call and every email that comes into us with a Safe Schools question, so that's been wonderful. We've also, our team has been trained as trainers in the Comprehensive School Threat Assessment Guidelines, so that I felt was really important in order to sustain that movement moving forward, to actually have trainers internally in our district. We're hosting a CSTAG training for administrators in March. We have 111 participants, and that includes representatives from special education, our SROs, our school psychs, and counselors. So it's going to be quite a large district training. And we will have threat assessment teams fully functioning in all of our schools by next fall, and those teams will include administrators, counselors, teachers, and SROs. And I've compiled some mid-year Safe Schools data so you can see a little bit what kinds of cases we're seeing. So again, I knew this would happen. It's okay, everybody? All right, so as of January 18th, we've had 48 district-level Safe Schools consequences meeting. 7 of those are reoffenders. In other words, they are students who have reoffended within this year or from last year to this year. We have 33% we've placed, had an alternative placement. There's some information here on if we've revoked permits, or some students have self-selected to leave the district. Not very many, you can see. You can see the gender of offenders and then the grade levels. I've made gray boxes for just our highest, the highest counts, which are 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th grade. Ethnicity of offenders is here. This is per Power, what they've marked in Power School. How many students have IEPs or 504 plans, and the types of offenses, so you can kind of see what we're dealing with at the district level. A lot of fighting, assault, and physical aggression, some weapons and threats, and drugs, alcohol. And then I'm keeping, and there's been 7 cases, I think that 7 cases that have been, you all have looked at. And then I'm keeping some data from way back before I even started in this district regarding the numbers of cases and how many of those students were ethnic minority students versus SPED students. You can see I haven't finished the 2022-2023 category yet because the year's not up, but I'm trying to see where those trends are heading as well. So, so that is that data. And then I guess I just wanted to offer any time for questions on any of this information.
Thank you, Emily, for joining us and
Sure.
for the presentation. And I would open it up for any questions from the board. Ashley.
Hi, Emily.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
So I am curious a little bit about the measurement for measuring SEL programs. So you talked about the time spent at each school and that first self-assessment. So I wonder if you could generally talk about that, but what I'm really hoping for is that in the spring, we have some measure of is this implementation of SEL improving attendance? Is it changing access to services? And also, can we survey, in addition to surveying students on how they feel about their self-assessment of skills, how do faculty and students feel about the programs being used by their school? Because
Yes.
there's so much choice.
Right.
How do they feel about it? And the last thing before I just turn it over to you would be, if we're looking at behavior specialists, there was fluctuation between how many schools are using them and where it's coming from. So I'm wondering if it'd be also helpful to capture how faculty feel about specialists.
Yes.
Did they just show up in my classroom and I knew about it? Did I reach out to them? How are we capturing if that's a really good model, and what other needs people may have in this area? Is a specialist helping in a way that is addressing para attrition, or is it, or is it not aligning with the schedule of when you do have a para? So just some general things about what we could survey in the future as you keep doing this work.
Okay. So, good questions. So yes, I would like to be able to tie our SEL programming to more student outcome data. I want to make sure that we have our programs up and running.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the first year of getting them moving, and I want to make sure that we had the actual SEL survey going. But ultimately, the data points I'm looking at are attendance, also some behavior documentation, and if our social emotional learning programming is affecting that. And I would also be really interested in collaborating with student services on how we could tie our SEL programming with what we're seeing in our counseling departments.
Yeah.
So I think for sure there's some things there that we'd like to expand on in the future. In terms of the specialists, the behavior specialists, so I do have the hours, and the way that behavior specialists are interacting with schools does fluctuate a lot. So one of the ways that I've started thinking about how to measure that is, in addition to some of this, like how often are we reaching out, how often are they reaching out to us, I have 5 to 6 questions written for the stakeholder survey that's coming out in March that is specifically our staff members' perception of behavior support.
Okay.
So how are they feeling about behavior support? And of course, I'm really hoping to see an increase in that with the presence of more behavior specialists in our buildings. So yeah, I've written several of those and worked with assessment and evaluation on those questions. So that's one way I'm hoping, another way I'm hoping to measure that. And then third, let me remember.
I tried to get it all in there.
Yeah, remind me your third one.
I think it was, how do faculty and students feel about the 40 minutes,
Oh,
and how
yes.
they're implemented
Okay.
at their school?
Yes, good one. So I would also like to do some of that surveying to find out how students and teachers are feeling about the programming. So again, it's one of those things where I wanted to make sure teams and principals had picked programming and they had given it a little bit of time to be implemented, and there's so much to learn. There's a little bit of a learning curve in how to implement those in your building. I do know there's some surveys being developed at the high school level and the middle school level to start asking these questions. So I know that that's definitely on our radar to ask how these things are going in the buildings.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Christy?
Thank you so much, Emily. It's always so interesting to see the information that you bring to us. So it's going to be more of feedback for you because it caught me a little bit by surprise.
Okay.
That before the winter break, I ended up having an opportunity to be in a classroom with juniors and seniors.
Mm-hmm.
And we were there for a whole different reason. But one of the things that they really wanted to ask about was the SEL and the 40 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And it was surprising how negative it was.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it was because they all talk and they know that their classrooms are different.
Yeah.
So all the teachers are doing things a little differently. And it was interesting to hear the different perspectives, of these kids. So it started out saying, well, we feel like this is really more geared towards elementary school kids because there are definitely more behavior problems, in the elementary than there are at the high school, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
That was really interesting, because they're just so all-knowing, right, at junior and seniors. But the thing that was that came across to me, and it kind of goes with what Ashley was saying, is if you have different classrooms doing different things, then it's going to tend to be, because they were very honest about it, just said, we're not interested in participating. And a lot of them just had worksheets, we're sitting there for 40 minutes working on these worksheets, we finish them, then we just sit there. So I think that you surveying that and getting that information back would be interesting to see how do you engage, especially, it seems to me, it was juniors and seniors that are really struggling with this 40 minutes, of how is it beneficial to them. And so then when we did bring up the piece about the high suicide rate that we were seeing and the mental illness issues that we were having in the high schools, they were surprised.
Yeah.
And so that was another piece that I thought, okay, where are we not connecting, the information, through the classes so that that our students feel like that it is beneficial to them in some way, shape, or form. I learned a lot. And so I guess maybe one of the things I would say is go into classrooms with juniors and seniors, and sit and survey them that way, because I don't know if you'll get real live, true grit answers back just through a survey, that if you go in and talk with them instead.
Yeah. So I have talked, I've been in a classroom at East High and gotten some feedback in person, face to face. And then I know after I think you had your visit, I went and spoke with a student at that school as well, and a lot of the confusion came around the difference between SEL and advisory, and there was definitely some confusion around that, which I hopefully cleared up with that particular student. And I think that's something worth explaining to our high schools, because there is a difference in what those things are.
Exactly.
And I think I agree with you. I think that we need to make sure our high schools have, not just high schools, all of our schools have like a committee that is looking at their SEL programming that involves students, right? So that the way that we're rolling this out in our schools has student voice and it is useful to the students that it is meant to serve. And so I think that that's something probably just in getting things started that we need to hear that feedback. I do know like Clayton has also done some surveying with students already on this stuff. So we are starting to hear that kind of feedback. And now I think the best thing that we can do as educators is like adjust to it. Adjust to what they need the best, what they need the most, and make sure that we continue to have their voice in tweaking those programs. So I do find that they're pretty receptive. A lot of students like appreciate our effort to reach them. Right. But it's like, and so if we say like, we're really trying to make this work for you, they're like, okay, here's what we need then. And so I think that we just need to work as partners, students and adults, to make this work for our kids.
I completely agree with you, and you just made my point, because probably the last thing that they said to us as I was leaving was, don't forget, we do have a voice. Yeah. Don't make decisions for us without involving us in those decision-making processes, which, of course, is so embarrassing, to have that said to you when you think that we've been so thoughtful at this table, with you over the last couple of years. But that was really an awakening for me. So I appreciate you saying that, because I think that is exactly what's missing.
Yeah, we had to give it a shot and see, and then just like look at where we are with it, and there's clearly some areas that we can adjust. Yeah.
Thank you, Christy. Any other thoughts or comments? Lydia?
I think just anecdotally, everything Christy said is like very, very true. I think students aren't necessarily opposed to social emotional learning, but they're opposed to the way that it's being implemented. I think also, while like there's a lot of like material like facts or skills that like high school students can learn, I think they might be more receptive to like, and I know the curriculum for each school is different, but like system where it's maybe more like conversation or like relationship based, rather than just like what at least it's been in my experience, which is like watching a TED Talk and then writing what I think about the TED Talk.
Okay.
Which I think like that's still valuable, but I think students would be more engaged if it was like more interactive.
Got it.
Thank you, Lydia, for the feedback. Any other thoughts or questions from the board?
I have a question.
Right.
So you talked about with this survey that you were surveying all the students. Are you surveying them on the elementary level as well?
We are. And one of the things that, and the surveys themselves are differentiated for different levels of students. For example, well, I think actually we just started using emojis for all the surveys. That just ended up being easier for every level. But the questions, like obviously the expectations for student social and emotional learning is different in 3rd grade versus 11th grade. So the questions, while they're similar, they grow in complexity in terms of what we want to see if students feel they know how to do around their self-awareness or their self-management. So one thing that we are looking at adjusting is we surveyed all the way from kindergarten to 12th grade at maybe not doing such young students moving forward, not because how they feel about their social and emotional learning isn't important, but because taking the survey was really hard for those kiddos. So that's something that we'll look at maybe adjusting. I will say that when we developed the survey, I had a team of people, including elementary school students or teachers, so we did our best to differentiate at every level, but it might not, the effort that goes into just facilitating the survey for like the 5-year-olds might not be worth it.
That's what I was getting at. I mean, my background is, in the elementary schools, and so I was concerned about how it was actually being implemented, and it can take a lot of time and can be frustrating for the children as well.
That is the feedback I've heard, and any teachers I've met with, I've tried to tell them we've heard you on that for sure, because that's the main feedback I've gotten.
Okay.
Thank you, Brian. Emily, I had go for it.
You do it.
Thank you. So Emily, just maybe a 2-part question, just to revisit the board's priority of SEL. The first part of the question is, how has that helped guide your work, number one? Has it made it more difficult in guiding your work? And would the second part, the board's considering a board retreat where we're going to be talking about potential goals for the board moving forward, and would that priority benefit your work more in the district more potentially if it was a specific and measurable goal?
Okay, so the first question, so I want to acknowledge the work you all have done around social emotional learning, because there are very few school boards in the country who have a priority around social emotional learning and have a position like mine. So this district is really on the cutting edge in terms of implementing social emotional learning and making it a focus. And anywhere I go, other educators feel like, so to answer the question, it's a huge help to have this be a priority in the district, because it's something everybody acknowledges as a priority, and therefore it makes my work much easier to talk about, because everybody knows this is a priority of the school board. So a lot of districts don't have that privilege, and so it's great. It's great, and it's cutting edge, and I want you all to know that. In terms of having it be a measurable goal, I mean, I definitely think that's something, it might focus my work a little bit more to know exactly what kind of measurement you all are looking for. I don't think, however, that it was misguided in 2018 to say the goal was to let's get a framework going. I think that was admirable, and probably it needed to happen. That needed to happen first. Yeah. Now that that's happened and we're moving towards looking at measurement, I would, it would be helpful to maybe talk more about what kinds of measurements the board might like to see from social emotional learning, and then I could, integrate those measurements into my work as well. So yes, I think that could be helpful, even if it was maybe a two-parter or something like that. It would help focus the work.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
Mohammed?
Thank you so much for everything you're doing out there. And I just, on a positive note, there is one survey from my son, and that says he loves SEL, and so are his classmates. I mean, he just I asked him, what do you like about it? And to him, he's just taking that moment, instead of diving in directly into the course or so, just taking time to reflect and, have that quietness and so and so. To him, it was just rejuvenating and re-energizing for him to be able to have a successful day. So I just want to say thank you for everything you're doing out there. And I have one question for you. As a board, is there something that you would wish we could do to make this program even more, valuable out there?
That's such a big question. I would have to think about it.
Yeah.
I don't want to answer just off the cuff without giving it some thought, but
appreciate that.
Definitely, there's some sustainability issues that are going to start coming up as we move this into year 5, year 6, and so on. So that's something I don't have any specific ideas right now, though. But yeah, let me think about that. I just appreciate you asking, and I also appreciate that your son is enjoying SEL, and I think we can. That's good to hear.
I'm glad. Yeah, I'm pleased. Once you think about it, email us.
Yeah. Okay.
Would love to know that. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Mohammed. Seeing no other. Oh, Brian.
I would just want to interject, Emily. I think some of the things that I heard is some students are, where is this coming from? How come we're doing this? And your comment about how we're cutting edge and that sort of thing, but I think that it's also valuable for us to consider that what we're really trying to do here is follow the instruction that we receive in the Utah Code. I mean, the administrative code, and I looked it up, R277 through 400 is dealing with all of this, and so I think that what we're trying to do is follow what we've been directed to do.
Yes.
Alan?
I think one thing that the board's going to need to consider, kind of to answer Mohammed's question. So if you remember, when the goal was first set by the board, there was money set aside for 3 years. Those 3 years ended last year, and then we funded and kind of expanded a little bit for this year, next year, using ESSER funds. Those ESSER funds will expire at the end of 2024. So those will be some discussions we'll be having to have during the next year, is the ongoing funding for these types of activities.
Yes, thank you, Alan, for bringing that up. And that is true. We have a number of all these folks who are helping support us out in the districts with safe schools and with behavior support. A number of them are funded with ESSER funds. So that's something that if we want to continue having that support in our buildings, we'll need to talk about how we'll make that work. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. All right, thank you, Emily. We appreciate your time and all the work that you do. Next item on the reports agenda is debt and capital budget. I believe I'm turning this over to Business Administrator Kearsley.
Okay, thank you. Just so the board knows, in June, the board will be asked to approve a budget, a district-wide budget, a revised budget for current year, and then the budget for the 23-24 year. That budget document is a very large document with a lot of information in it. So what we'll be doing over the next couple months is bringing you chunks of that budget information, so you don't have to try and absorb it all near the end when you need to approve it. So with today's presentation, it's just information on how we're headed, and if the board wants to head in a different direction, they need to let us know, but this is the way we're going to be heading. So I'll present the budgets that we're proposing. Again, we're not voting on the budgets tonight. This is just kind of breaking the budget out into little pieces. Want to note there's some highlights in there on the memo, the cover sheet for the capital and debt budgets. Included is the district office rebuild, the finalizing of phase 1 of the sustainability projects. There's a transfer of $1.8 million from the general fund to the capital fund, and that is savings that we realize in the general fund due to solar and other efficiencies that we've used in the sustainability fund, moved to the capital to pay off the debt. The TELP loan that we got for the sustainability projects. In addition, we'll talk about this in a little more detail. We have debt that we're paying off this year, and the budget as presented in these documents will propose that we recapture that debt levy into the capital levy to keep those funds flowing for capital needs ongoing. We'll talk a little bit more about that through these documents, and then when we start talking about tax rates, we'll talk about that more in a future meeting as well.
So can I interject something right now?
Yes.
Can you help me understand some of these things? I'm new to all of this, and when you say, cost for the district office rebuild, I don't know what that is, and I need some background information, and hopefully somewhere that's going to come.
Yep. When we get into the sheets, there'll be a line, and we'll kind of go into a little more detail about that line.
Okay.
So the first page we're just going to skip is, yes.
Can I just ask, I'm
Yep.
sorry, Nate, can I ask
Please.
a question? So on that premise of what Brian is saying, because I think that at times we all think we know all the same things. And because we've been talking about the sustainability project for so long, I don't know if Brian and Ashley, if that's something you've talked to them about, if they really know what the sustainability project really is and what the TELP is. So I don't know if you two need more information about that, or
I had my crash course with Alan, and so I have a little bit more information, but happy to learn more.
And see, I haven't had the crash course, so that's when I started asking those questions. I'm going to need some background information because I don't have this.
Yeah, and again, when we get to those sheets, we'll talk about it a little bit more. But again,
okay, perfect.
We're not approving anything tonight, so any questions that don't get answered tonight, or if you still need some more clarification, reach out. We can go through in a lot more detail on a one-on-one basis. So I've presented this little chart here. We're going to go through debt service first. Back in the 90s, this is the last time the district issued or went through a bond election. the district had a bond election for approximately $160 million. With that, we did a lot of building rebuilds and retrofits. Most of the buildings you see now were built with those funds. So I want you to look at this. Kind of helps you understand how the debt service fund works. When the public, through an election, a bond election, authorizes the district to issue funds, we then institute a debt levy, a debt tax levy, that each year brings in enough revenue to pay off the debt, to pay off the mortgage. So as you can see, both the blue line and the expenditure line kind of mimic each other. So as our expenditures go up, so does our property tax, because that levy will continue to increase to cover the cost of the bonds. And then as bonds roll off and mature and get paid off, then it starts headed back down. So you see this whole chart kind of follows that. Issued the bonds, really had we built a lot of schools, then we started paying off that debt through the 2000s, and then we started, debt started rolling off, and that's why you see that trend going back down. And the debt expense is really made up of two things: principal and interest, just like a home mortgage. And that's all laid out in this chart to kind of help you just get a big picture of how that debt service works. So we'll turn to the next page. Shows historical actuals of the debt service from 2019-20, and then up through last year, and then a revised current year budget, and then a next year budget. So if you look at the redemption of bond principal, you can see in 2020-21, the amount that we had to pay on our mortgage went from $8 million down to $3.9 million. So we had bonds that we paid off that matured. And if you remember, the board opted at that point to refund that money back to the taxpayer. So we didn't recollect that levy to keep as tax revenue coming into the capital fund. So if you note, going from 2022 to 23-24, we have a drop from 4.1 million to 2.0 million. Again, that's another bond that's getting paid off. So as I explained, what we'll propose is that we recapture that levy, and it will require truth in taxation, because it ends up being even though the taxpayer wouldn't notice a difference because they've been paying it through a debt, and now they've been paying it through a capital levy. By statute, that is a property tax increase, so it would need to go through a truth in taxation hearing.
Alan, let me ask you a couple questions and make sure I'm understanding this right. Sam, can you go back one slide? But I'm going to keep my finger here in the page where I am. It looks like in 2002 or 3 there's a big jump up, and then a couple years later there's another big jump up. If I understand this right, so the public authorized $160 million of borrowing power, but you didn't borrow that all at the same time. You borrowed that in chunks as there were a series of buildings, and then we got done with those, and then we do the next one. So it wasn't just one big loan that you took. You took several smaller loans over a series, and so some of them get paid off sooner than others of them get paid off. So I've got that right. So what I'm seeing here then on page 4 with those expenditures, that our mortgage payment in 19 and 20 was just under $8 million, and then in 2021 it was right about $8 million, or you paid one all the way off. And then you didn't need that much to make mortgage payments anymore. You only needed $4 million to make mortgage payments. So we've got the debt levy, the debt service levy, and that's the one that we use to pay the mortgage off. But then we've also got the capital account, because once a building's built, it's going to need a new chiller. I mean, not that one, but the other one. And so when you need a new chiller, because buildings age even as new ones are being built. And so it's not the debt service that pays for the worn out chiller or the worn out roof or the new whatevers. It's the capital fund. And so sometimes boards will say, okay, we don't need that revenue, we don't need that money anymore for the mortgage payment, but we sure could use it in the capital fund for ongoing, for chillers and roofs and those big expenditures. And if we're charging this much in capital, in debt, and when that loan is all paid off, we just move that money that we've been paying for debt over into our ongoing capital expenses. When I get my Salt Lake City tax receipt, it's neutral. My taxes haven't really gone up, but we do then have the district then has that revenue in the capital outlay, that's additional revenue to help pay on the maintenance and those other things. Am I seeing that right? And so what's coming up now is we've needed $4 million a year to pay debt, but starting next year we only need $2 million to pay debt. So should we move those $2 million? Should we just make those $2 million disappear, or should we keep raising those $2 million but put it into the capital budget? That's the question you're asking.
Yep, that is a perfect explanation. Thank you.
I got it.
Christie?
So can I just layer something into that? Because that was really great, Martin, the way that you explained that with Alan. So this kind of goes to when a board makes a decision that may tie or help a board in the future, right? And one of the things that Alan knows that the previous boards have done is to say, because we did that bond for 160, we intermingled, because there was no way we were going to build that many schools on $160 million. Right. We intermingled our capital,
right,
with that in order to pay for all those schools. And at the same time knew that we, as we've been criticized about doing tax hikes, it's been very intentional to put that money into capital, because the intention was to pay for those 2 elementary schools plus the district building without having to go for a bond, that we wanted to pay as we go. So we've done 2 of those so far, right, with the 2 elementaries, and also, been able to put aside money for our district office. So one of the things that the previous board had said was, when those debt services roll off, let's give that back to the taxpayers, if we don't need it. And I think that now that Alan's introduced this, is saying that, let's take this debt service, this $2.3 million, and put it into capital. For me, as I think about that, and I think we've done a really good job of this with our taxpayers, is be very clear what we're using the money for. Mm-hmm. And so if we're going to do that, and I'm assuming that Alan has a plan and that would be presented to us over the next little while, of why would we do that instead of letting that go back for tax relief? Because part of it was because the intention of the previous board was to bond for the high schools in the future. And so to be able to provide tax relief as long as we could until we got to that new bond that we were going to be doing. And so I think that historical perspective that you've just, or being able to lay all of that out so that we understand that, then leads to what Alan is trying to, is saying, is that when that rolls off, and we'll have another one that will roll off in a year, right? 25, for the future board to then say, once you put that into capital, then you make a commitment that it stays in capital, that you try not to pull it out of capital, because we have needs. As we know now that it's been 20 plus years since that last one, and we need chillers or whatever else we might need for those buildings, that we need to have a substantial amount of money if we want to pay as we go instead of always looking at bonding. And I, for one, have appreciated that Salt Lake District has been conservative in our budgeting when we think about how to do that. So thank you for saying what you did, Martin. And I think that as we go forward, I would just expect, as you've done in the past and as the past practice, is to say, what would we use that money for?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Christy. Brian, did you have a follow-up question?
She covered it.
Perfect. Thank you, Christy, for that, and Martin as well.
I
Alan?
interrupted,
Nope,
please.
you're my wingman. Good job.
I'm the interrupter.
So on page 5 shows projections into the future. You can see in 24-25 we will pay off the last of the debt issued in the 90s, and there is no debt going forward because there's been no bond election. So this just shows you what's left there to pay off on our current debt. And page 6 just shows what those debts are. In we only have the Series 2013. It's Series 2013 because we did a lot of refunding. You know, when we bonded in the 90s, interest rates were higher, but then we refunded to get lower rates. What 2013 means is in 2013, we issued some refunding bonds to refinance our debt at a lower interest rate. Now if we turn to page 7, so that's debt fund. Any questions on debt fund? Okay, now we're going to move on to capital projects fund. On page 7 is a similar graph, and as you can see, it doesn't follow a nice kind of pattern like the debt service fund did, because it depends on what building we happen to be building in a certain year or how much it costs. But it's interesting, as you see the orange line, other financing, that's when we issued bonds. You see those peaks, and then they go back down, and then peaks, because when we issue the bonds, the bond revenue goes into the capital fund. And then as you see that orange line, I mean, there's a little blip in the 2010, 2011. That's when we did those Q-skip bonds for the one person who was around when we did that. It's a different method of taking out a loan that the districts used in the past. And then in 21, 22, you see another blip in the orange line. That was our TELP funds. So since we're talking about TELP, we'll go into that a little bit. So the board in 2019 or 20, anything that happened near the pandemic gets a little fuzzy. They issued a sustainability resolution. And I don't know if Nate, if you want to kind of highlight, really become carbon neutral by 2030, 2030, and then carbon neutral, and then carbon zero, net zero by 2050. So those kind of projects cost, a bit of money. So what we've been working on right now is it's a multiple phase. So in October, not last October, the October before, we presented kind of a plan how to get there, a roadmap. And we're working on phase 1, and we got what's called a tax-exempt lease purchase. It's another way to issue debt. So we issued the debt for $23.5 million, and then that debt's a 15-year mortgage. We'll pay off the payments by the energy savings from the sustainability projects. So it's kind of a net zero cost to the district, just a way of financing those projects. Otherwise, we'd have to either dip into our reserves or go get a different kind of loan. So the TELP allowed us to use our savings to offset the cost of the loan. Again, I emphasize that was phase 1. Phase 2 will be something we'll be discussing in the future, because as the roadmap to get us to those goals. So phase 1 we're working on and should be finished next year. So we'll be talking about phase 2 on that sustainability resolution in the coming months. I also want to point out the yellow line on this chart. The yellow line is our fund balance, so that's money that we're setting aside for projects. You can see it, so as it's rising, that's when we're collecting more taxes than we're spending, and then you see the dips. That's usually when we built a building or incurred other significant expenditures with and we at that point we flip and we spend more than we actually brought in the current year, and so we dip into our reserves. You can see here in the last couple of years those reserves started getting pretty high, but then you have a big drop. The reserves are getting high for 2 reasons: just because we hadn't had any major rebuild projects for a while. We also got that TELP loan, and that we didn't spend it all in 1 year, so that went into fund balance. And that's why you then see a big drop for 2 reasons. We're using the TELP loan down, and we're building the district office. So that's, we're using the resources. We're not getting a loan for the district office. We're using resources we had for that project. What questions you have on the district? This is a good time to talk district office.
So how much is the district office building going to cost? I have heard differing amounts, like around 30 million to begin with, and now we're at 60 million.
So the numbers you have heard are accurate.
Okay.
So as when we went out for bid a couple years ago, the bid package anticipated a budget of 34 million, but you really don't know what that's going to do until you get all your subcontractors come in and bid the different, you know, the concrete, the steel, the HVAC systems, and so forth. What we've seen heavily in the capital area is inflation has hit construction harder than our other areas. So with the bids that came in from our subcontractors, we're looking at about $60 million now for that building. But as you can see from the yellow line, we had the reserves to cover it, and it uses a lot of them, but it doesn't put us in the hole.
Right, I see that. I guess I'm a penny pincher or something. I mean, 34 million to 60 million, I mean, that's a huge increase, and I understand inflation and all of that. Did the board approve the 34 million? What has been approved to build this building?
Well, it's been approved to build the building.
Okay.
So
we haven't approved any money. We've just
we've approved the 30, because there's a PO out there that's about 34 million.
Okay.
So what will have to come in the future is when we run out of that 34, an increase to that PO for the rest of the cost of the building. Noting that we do have contractual commitments that we've signed with the contractor to build the building.
Right.
And I think another thing probably to clarify is, if you can recall, what was the cost of maintaining the old building that we had in there?
Well, the old building had actually never been retrofitted, unlike all of our schools, so it was not seismically sound, so we would have had to do some major retrofitting. The HVAC system was completely, I mean, every time we delayed the project, Paul would pull out his hair thinking, I don't know if I can keep heat on, or I don't know if I can keep cooling on.
Okay. Yeah, because one of the questions that a lot of people are asking right now is like, we have so many programs that we need at school that will benefit our students. How is it that we are going? How are we affording to pay for all of these buildings? And, you know, if you have like a simple belief.
Well, I think it's important to note that we're using capital funds. So
Okay.
capital funds are levied for capital projects, not for instructional projects.
Thank you.
That's our general fund, and those funds, you know, so we're not talking about the general fund budget
Yeah.
today. We'll talk about that in the coming months, but these funds were specifically raised for capital projects, and that's what's
Yeah.
being used for this building.
And that is fantastic. So let's, you know, when we get questions from our communities, I think explaining to them, you know, the difference of funds will really actually help them understand that we are not just like, you know, forgetting about our students. Because I personally believe none of us here has that intention in any way whatsoever.
Thank you. Christy?
So I kind of want to start with the good news, because I think that you have really good news on this graph, and it might not be apparent to everybody, but when you talk about, Alan, when, you know, we refinance those bonds for the lower interest rate, we literally are saving our taxpayers millions of dollars. And I think that that's something that we should be proud of, you know, as a district. And that certainly hasn't been highlighted, you know, in recent months. But this definitely shows that. And I think that going forward, it just shows how responsible we are as the fiscal agents, you know, of this budget. To Brian's concern, as a member of the board that said, yes, go ahead with the building. Again, one of those things that we've tied you and Ashley to, right? We felt confident, with the information that we got about the building and the costs around it, that we needed to move forward, with the rebuild of that building. Of course, I think our face looked like your face did when you heard the 60 million. That's been really hard to swallow. But I think that it sounds to me, and Alan, I don't want to assume this, but that might be one of the reasons why you want to keep the debt service going into capital, is to help replenish some of that money.
Help replenish that. And I mean, it's just clearly evident that in the capital realm, inflation has hit harder than, I mean, you think you're paying a lot for eggs, you're paying a lot more for concrete and steel.
We are. So I think that my last question is, I know that one of our concerns was because of the cost. Is there any room for negotiation, or, looking at maybe the building not being as, I don't know, I think that the footprint's the footprint. It's not like it can be any bigger, but is that something that's still in conversation?
Yeah, I mean, we'll continue as the building progresses to engineer things that might help with cost savings, but we won't get back down to $30 million. I mean, we might save 10,000 here and 10,000 there, and we're doing the best we can on that, but we won't see those pre-construction estimates.
I have one question about TELP, which is, TELP is a loan, right?
Right.
So when we're looking at this, can you just give us a general picture of, that's another thing we would inherit, right? Like, this is a loan, so we need to pay back that loan.
Right.
How does that figure into what we've seen here?
So remember, the first we talked about there'll be a transfer from the general fund to the capital of $1.8 million. That $1.8 million is savings, so we won't be spending as much on electricity because of the solar. We'll have more efficient buildings. So that's the savings that will then move over to the capital and pay off the loan. So again, there won't be any cuts to any programs. There's no additional incremental cost because we'll be using our cost savings to pay off that loan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Please continue.
So let's move on to page 8. We're gonna speed up a little bit here. Again, same thing as with that. We see some historical numbers, and then the revised 2022, 23, and the proposed 23, 24 budget. You can see over on your left, those are kind of the categories. So our big construction projects are in that contracted service line. That's where we're building buildings, hiring contractors to put on solar panels, etc. And then down at the bottom is where you see our fund balance. You can see at the end of 21-22, we had a fund balance reserved for capital projects of $84 million, and then you'll see that go down as we spend those dollars on both the sustainability and the district budget, or the district office, to where that will drop down to $17 million. So there will, we won't go to zero, but we do see a significant drop there. And if you turn the page over onto page 9, the first column there really breaks out. So we have ongoing capital expenses. That's our chillers, that's our roofs, and that's broken out for 23-24 is $3.3 million. The sustainability, the $4.7 million, that's the remaining of that phase 1, and then construction, $41 million. So that's what we anticipate in 23-24. That's when the district office is anticipated to be done. And if you drop down to the fund balance, you can see after we hit our low of 17 million, because as of right now there are no other approved major capital projects, then that fund balance starts building up again. But we know that there are needs out there, so those zeros you see after those big expenses won't stay zeros once we've brought these bigger projects to the board and received approval for those.
Alan, can you give us an idea of what a healthy fund balance is relative to the percentage of our working budget?
There's no, it's kind of tricky, especially in the capital, because as you saw in the graph, capital goes up and down depending on what we're doing. So if your fund balance gets too big and you don't need it, then you're taxing too much. but you also need to look forward to say, what are our, I mean, we built a lot of buildings in the, late 90s and early 2000s. So they're now 20 some odd years old. There will come a time when we're rebuilding or significantly remodeling those. So with capital, you really have to look at what is your long-term capital plan. And so you need to make decisions today to make sure you're not caught, without enough money to meet your needs in the future.
One of the things I asked about when I got here in October was what is our long-term building replacement plan? Building replacement, that's an easy conversation when you're in a growing district, because people say, oh, we got all these new kids, we need a new building. But when you're in a building with a stable population or a slightly declining population, it's not so intuitive to folks that we need to be building new buildings. But the life cycle of an HVAC system, the heating, ventilate, is about 20-25 years. Then we have to ask ourselves, do we want to squeak those out to 25 years and replace them when they break? Or do we want to replace them 2 years before they break, before the life cycle goes out? The life cycle of a roof is 15 to 20 years, depending on the roofing system, the expense of the system. And so these buildings that we built in the 90s, they're now pushing that 30-year, and every year some building is going to be 30 years old. When you've got as many buildings as we have, every year we're going to have a building that needs to have the HVAC system changed out, or the whatever system changed out, or the roof changed out. Those are the big ticket ones. There's others, and then every 60 years, again, if we've got 40 buildings and they've got a life cycle of, let's say, 60 years, that means every year we've got 1 or 2 buildings that's 60 years old that's going to need to be replaced. Pay as you go, as I know from my own home finances. When I borrow money, on a 30-year loan, 20-year loan, I pay twice the amount of what it was that I borrowed. When I pay cash, that's a lot cheaper. So we try to have a pay-as-you-go cycle for as many of these things, but if it's going to be pay-as-you-go, then you're not doing it through debt, you're doing it through revenue. And that's why it's nice to have a healthy, when you say fund balance, it looks like it's up, but it's really not up, because next year we've got boilers and roofs and these other things, and then in the meantime we're saving over here for the new car, because the old one's going to go out at some point. You just cross out 3 zeros and it's the same as our home finances. It's the same problems we have in our own houses. Maybe 4 zeros.
All right, so let's now, on page 10, is kind of looking at our schools, and Paul and his team go through and they develop a 5-year, a plan and cost estimate of what do we need to put in these buildings for roofs, for chillers, for boilers, and so forth, and plan that out for 5 years. And here you see each school and kind of the estimated cost that we're going to put into those. And this is a summary. It really, in the detail, and for this school and this year, we're going to replace the chiller. For this school and this year, we're going to replace the roof. On page 11, so remember I talked about that other little blip in the other financing. Is you hear the QSCIB, Qualified School Construction Bonds. It was a federal program that helped us get some loans, and we got federal government help on the interest rate. So those are not getting paid through the debt service fund. Again, debt service fund is only for voter approved bonds. Other debt gets paid through the capital. So this is a little amortization schedule you see of those bonds. And then if we jump over for the last thing here with capital, so here, just skip the memo part, and then here you're going to see a list. These are the projects that in detail for each school that we plan on doing in the 23-24 year. So listing out there at the top, so Backman has no major construction plans planned, but you have Beacon Heights, 5-year riser inspection and CO sounder bases for fire alarm. I'll just pretend I know exactly what those are. But again, Paul and his team go out to the schools and they do a capital observation each year, and with the principal, and kind of determine what needs to happen in this building. And this is the detailed list, and then we take that, and that's how we kind of build the capital budget for next year.
In all sincerity, if you have any questions about specific things and where the dollar amounts are, or the chillers, or why the one chiller is expensive and the other one's less expensive, please feel free to email. I do say Paul, but email Alan and Paul, and we'll get you the detail and sit down with you and talk those things through.
So, any further questions on debt and capital? Seeing none. Now we're gonna jump over to school allocation. So on your desk you have some legal size paper. So if we look at the very first legal size paper, the district allocates to schools through various different methods. Some just board allocation, some their school land trust, some their teacher student success act that gets allocated to the schools to be used on a school discretionary level. If you're trying to look at that, that's not the one we're looking at. So you don't have anything for this one. Sorry. So if you look at this these allocations are largely allocated schools based on their student enrollment. So we have a revised current year. So what happens at this point is Sam has projections for next year's enrollment. And the first page you're looking at, so we adjust those allocations based on actual October 1 counts. So the revisions on the first one are for current year school allocations. You can see we have a column, that very first column, APIB, that only goes to high schools. We allocate money to those schools for their APIB programs. Then we have board distributed student achievement funds that's solely based on enrollment. So it's a certain amount per kid that each school gets. Then we have some at-risk allocations. The next column's for English language learners, and then we have at-risk, other at-risk kids. So that's allocated out to the schools based on their counts of students that fit in those categories. And then some of these are historical. You see that school lunch. We allocate $3,000 to each school that collects school lunch payments to help with the processing and collection of those payments in the office. Extra secretarial help. So if the secretary needs to come in the summer or work some overtime, that's allocated as well. So you can see we have all these different categories that we allocate to the schools. Then we end up with, let me point out in P, because here's the one change, current year. So if you remember, we talked about, those that were on the board in November, remember we talked about increasing the coaches' pay, the number of days available. So you're going to see in the next year that we've allocated more money in the extracurricular activities to cover the additional cost of that coaches' pay. Again, we have school state land trust. Those allocations are given to us by the state board. They give us actually the land trust one, and they don't change that, so that's good. The TSSA money also comes from the State Board of Education, but they'll give us, I think now they were revising that as October 1, but they've stopped doing that. So, but we don't have an actual allocation, so we've just used current year allocation until we get the new allocation from the State Board. So again, your first page is current year revised. Your second page are the proposals. Again, we're not making any changes to any of the allocations or percentages, with the exception of that extracurricular, which we bumped up to cover the additional cost of coaches' pay. And then if you look at your third page, first I want to point out on your second page, so you can see that if you look at your grand total, so we're allocating about $20.5 million to the schools, for the schools to make their discretionary choices. So those are made by SICs, SCCs, principals, of what their needs are at their individual schools. So that's quite a bit of money we allocate out to those schools. Also quite a bit of responsibility we have on our principals to manage those budgets. So I just want to point that out. Your third legal size page, so we allow, with the exception of the federal programs that are allocated, we allow the schools to carry over. So if they don't spend the funds, it'll carry over to the next year. And if you just look at the grand total of that third page, what they carried over from 21-22 to 22-23 was a grand total of $4.6 million, or 8.4, I've been talking too much. $8.4 million was carried over from 21-22 to 22-23. So again, if schools don't spend those allocations, they get to carry them over.
Ellen?
Yes.
Is that just for 1 year that they can carry them over? Or do you, I mean, is there a percentage?
There's no limitations on it. However, if we saw a school that their carryover was getting pretty large, we would be talking to the principal, say, we're allocating these funds to your school to be used for your students. You need to come up with ways to use them.
So when you look at, sorry, can I ask? Of course. Sorry. So when you look at this would also be a conversation that would be happening at the school community council, right? That the principal should be sharing this information with their school community councils.
Yeah. And not necessarily all. I mean, community council is really involved in that school land trust allocation. Other allocations might be just principal or principal and SIC, but it shouldn't be these conversations shouldn't be held in vacuums with one person, because it's really identifying what are the needs of our students. Here's the resources we have. How can we use those resources to best address the needs of the students?
Thank you.
Lydia?
What is the state school land trust and MTSS money based on?
The school land trust is, I mean, we can go into the whole big land trust discussion, but so there's the land trusts that are basically federal money, federal lands that the state land trust gains money on, and then they use it as investments, and then the investments that they get, they distribute to the schools. So that largely depends on how much the state land trust agency is getting off their investments. And that's been growing year after year after year, and then it's allocated to schools based on their average daily membership or enrollment. And same with it's TSSA, Teacher and Student Success Act. It's an amount that gets appropriated by the legislature, and then it's allocated. So the legislature appropriates a statewide amount, and it gets allocated throughout the districts of the state and the schools by school student counts.
Ashley?
Yeah, I have a question. I don't really, okay, I'm trying to think through how I want to say this. I think I understand the formula which allocates the FTE from these numbers, but what I don't understand is the FTE reductions that were called for last year, that the past board voted to kind of cushion. Maybe that's the wrong verb, but that's the verb I'll use. Does the FTE for schools and principals this year, when they're getting these allocations, is it impacted at all by that choice? Like, would you see a jump or a dip that doesn't really make sense?
Yeah, so let me just clarify. These school allocations are not related to the FTE allocations.
They're not. Well, that makes more sense.
And what you'll see is that schools may choose to use these discretionary funds to increase the amount of FTE they have in their school. So the FTE allocation is a totally separate allocation that's not included in these numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Christy?
Can I ask one more question? Sorry. Okay, so I'm looking at the carryovers, and I'm dying on some of them. I really am. I mean, I'm thinking that, do we need to have a little bit more information as to why we have a school, one of our middle schools, that has almost $1 million in carryover?
Right. So a couple things. I mean, the conversations will either be A, are we allocating you too much money? B, are you not spending it wisely? But we have an ESSER fund issue going on right now.
Okay.
So as we allocate money out to schools using ESSER funds, since there's not a supplanting rule for ESSER funds, they may have taken some of the expenditures they had in their allocations and moved them over to ESSER, like put parapros in ESSER.
Right.
And so you've seen these carryovers build with ESSER funds. What hopefully you're going to see is as ESSER funds go away, they've built themselves a little nest egg, and that'll help cushion the end of ESSER.
So should we have that column on this page, Alan, that shows ESSER funds? And I mean, I don't know, because okay, I'm listening to you. Okay. I'm just, my heart's racing a little bit on some of these, because I think the criticism that always comes is this money, because Salt Lake District is one of few districts in the state that pushes much money. You just said that, that $20 million that we push out to the schools. And the expectation is that you spend it, and that it is spent on, professional development, our students, resources, whatever it is. And so it's a little hard to see the disparity, in some of these carryovers.
Right. So clearly that's something that we need to talk with school support with and our principals to really, let's look at those carryovers and say, at what point is this carryover excessive?
It's okay,
because I think there does come a point when it's excessive. So, it's okay to have a little nest egg, but it's not okay to just have a huge war chest that you're never going to need.
Yep. One question here. Oh, can I?
Of course.
Thank you. So I'm looking at the about school lunch, the $3,000. So let me understand this. So is that $3,000 to help students who are not able to?
No. So what that is, so years ago, money was collected in the cafeteria for school lunch.
Okay.
As a better control of cash, we opted to move that cash receipting function into the office of the school. So that's going to require some additional time from secretarial time to perform that function. So that allocation is to offset that additional cost of receiving cash for lunches in the central office versus not in the cafeteria.
And so we got some schools, for example, that we have a lot of marginalized communities, and so I'm just trying to understand. So if we are distributing this $3,000 equitably between all of those schools, and we know some schools probably has much more administrative work to manage those. Do you see what I'm saying?
Well, what you're going to have is your economically disadvantaged schools actually have a lot less because their kids are on free and reduced lunch.
Yeah.
So there may be schools that have little or no cash receipting of school lunch, but we still, instead of getting into the weeds on that, we still just allocate the even $3,000 across the schools.
Okay. Thank you.
Lydia, did you have a question?
Yeah. So some of the things are based on enrollment, but some of them aren't. Like extracurricular activities is just given the same amount of money to every school, even though the enrollments are pretty different. And then there's just a few others that are the same or similar. Can you walk me through that?
It's extracurricular, regardless of the size of the school, they still have one football team, one basketball team. So the size of enrollment doesn't really affect the number of coaches that they have and the number of teams that they're transporting, and those funds are used for that. So that's why that's allocated evenly across the schools. They will get more or less depending on what their fees are and how many of their participants are paying their fees. But that's why those are even. And did you have another particular column you were looking at?
The board distributed student achievement funds. It just seems like Highland is getting more money than East and West with smaller ones.
So if you're looking at, are you looking at current year revised?
Yes. The first
yeah.
sheet?
Yeah, so the reason for the Highland getting more is when we estimated their enrollment for current year. So last year when we made their FTE allocation, their enrollment on October 1 came in quite a bit higher than what we had anticipated. So at that point we have the option of allow Highland to hire two more, they were 2 FTE underfunded, allow Highland to hire 2 more FTE or we give them extra cash, and then they can use that cash as they see fit, whether it's a productivity period, hire some additional help. So when we talked to the principal, he opted to receive the additional cash versus the additional FTE, and that's for this year only, and then that goes away. So if you look at the next year projections, you're not gonna see that Highland be a little bit higher.
Awesome, thank you so much.
You're welcome. And then your third sheet is your Title I funding. You have a 5-year history. There's a formula that Title I is largely distributed on fourth sheet. I know I'm way behind schedule, so I'm losing track. That's your Title I allocations. They're largely dependent on free and reduced lunch counts, is how those are allocated. I just want you to look at the bottom. So there is a cut of $390,000 for next year in Title I. Again, Title I is funded from the feds based on student count. So two things happened here. Student counts are going down, so Title I goes down. But if you look at your history, so for last year we had a bump. So through the pandemic, the feds threw in some additional money into Title I. And so really what we're doing is dropping back down to pre-pandemic levels of allocations. And then the grand total amount's similar to what it was pre-pandemic. Schools may change depending on how their enrollment changed or their free and reduced lunch count changes, so they may go up or down. But the overall allocation is largely just returning to pre-pandemic levels. And then I quickly want to talk about your blue and your green sheets. So let's go with the green sheet first. So all those lovely spreadsheets with all those numbers kind of come down to how much per student is this particular area getting, and the green sheet kind of summarizes what that information is. And then the blue sheet's an FTE allocation. Again, that's not included in any of this school allocation, but it's just information for the board. You can see, like, principals, we allocate 1. Elementary assistant principals, we have 23. Middle school, et cetera, and then there's our teacher to student ratio allocations. You can see we have kindergarten grades 1 and I just want to know in kindergarten, so pass through committee today that kindergartens would be funded on a full WPU, going statewide full day kindergarten. Still has to pass the all the other things, but it's looking very promising. So if that passes, then we'll have to look at how that affects these allocations. Again, these are here for your information. There's no real changes to it from previous years.
Alan, when you look at that 1 to 50, I mean, we don't really have one teacher per 50 kindergarten teachers.
So the allocation is for assuming half-day kindergarten. So 1 to 50 would be 25 in the morning, 25 in the afternoon. But we also have other funding sources that aren't included in this that are so the district receives quite a bit of other optional full-day kindergarten funds. Again, just for viewing into the future, if the full-day kindergarten does get approved, those optional funds will go away and be replaced by additional money on the WPU. That was a lot of talking, a lot of information, but again, what the goal is that come June, when it's time for the board to approve the budget, you feel comfortable enough with the information presented that you feel, you're not going to understand every single number, but comfortable enough with the process and how we got to those budget numbers to feel good about approving the budget. So if you have any questions on this, let me know. In next month, we'll be bringing a different topic and just kind of piecemealing that budget together as we get ready for the June approval.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you, board. Thank you, community, for spending that extra time with us. I feel like the information was really valuable, and the extra questions that we had throughout the presentation for both of those report items, Alan, was really helpful. So thank you for spending the extra time with us. Moving along to our discussion agenda, the first item is our population and boundary study. I'll turn the time over to Superintendent Bates.
Thank you. Here we go. Thanks, Sam. Board members, you'll recall we had a preliminary presentation at the last board meeting. This really builds on that, and so as there are questions as we go along, and perhaps I may refer folks to that prior presentation. And I know that you've been hearing from folks in the community, and would suggest that you look at, that you refer them to that prior one as well if it feels as though pieces are missing in the conversation. So let's jump in. Go to the next slide. We've appointed. Oh, look at that picture. Does anyone see that guy in this room?
It's really big in our presentation.
Yeah.
It's really big on the screen, too.
So,
It's better than my driver's license picture and my passport. And it's still on. So I'm not gonna complain.
well, you look great there, Brian. So those who don't know Brian Conley, there's Brian Conley. Brian's been appointed administrator on special assignment to oversee, to shepherd the board's policy G5, to shepherd that through the process. And so as we'll talk about this a couple of times in the presentation, Brian will be the one meeting with school community councils, with principals and school community council chairs, helping host as we have those, open houses, things like that. Brian I'll encourage you a couple of times, as people have questions, that are couched as comments, or comments that are couched as questions, whichever way that goes, just direct those to Brian. Brian eventually will bring to the board, he'll capture every comment that's made and bring those to you in 5-inch binders, so you'll have everything that anybody said. This is really important, that every board member have all the same information from all the same people, in order to make decisions that are fair. Next slide, if you would. Board members, I'm really impressed with the policy that you have, the policy that you've adopted, G5, which is a population and boundary study policy. We are now in February, and so blown up there, the superintendent or superintendent's designee presents the Board of Education a list of potential school boundaries to study, and the board may approve an official study list. As a reminder, next slide, please. One more. Thank you. From G5, you've listed these 12 things that need to be considered as a boundary decision is being made, or a boundary decision, or a consolidation, or a closure by any other name. As those decisions are made, these components need to be considered. I've spoken with a number of people about the impact of special programs. Are we going to be aware of a special ed hub? Are we going to be aware of this gifted program? The answer is absolutely yes. It's number 10. That special programs that's listed there, those will be, according to the policy, those need to be considered. Now, I need to tell you, I have seen in other districts, as this process rolls forward, that from time to time, parents try and corner board members, if you will, or staff members try and corner board members and encourage them to be champions for a specific school, or for a specific this or a specific that. I'd really encourage you that when that occurs, when you hear these comments, when you have these kinds of conversations, that you'd encourage and direct those folks again to Brian to collect all of that information. As you hear these things, it's really important that all board members receive the same information for this process to move forward in a fair way.
Superintendent,
Please.
Christy had a comment.
So Superintendent, I appreciate you saying that. So maybe a little bit further direction for us. So I'll give you a scenario that we're invited, or that we are a part listening to a school community council, and this information comes up and we're asked. It's hard not to be lobbied, or to ask a question and then to be answered. And so I'm just wondering, and maybe Brian has the best, format for this, but for me, it would be so helpful, and I know, Brian, that we'll clone you in some way, to have these meetings, whether it's in, I don't know, with the school community councils, with the teachers, with parents, however it looks, because if you're asking us to direct that to Brian, I just want to be able to make sure that I'm doing that with fidelity, and that my community councils don't think I'm trying to dodge them in some way, shape, or form, or not provide information to them about what is going on. So maybe just some further direction.
We'll come back in a few slides to this same chart, but we're going to, what will be blown up instead of this orange piece will be the green piece, which is the next steps. And in those next steps, that'll be the superintendent and superintendent's designee visits with every school community council and with every community council and principal. Those are, so really 2 meetings at each. And so the response, I think, to a school community council of people, oh my goodness, you need to be to that meeting when Brian's there with his yellow notepad writing down every comment that you make. And that way he'll have it, and then as the process goes forward, all of those things will be considered, and we'll be able to move that forward. So I'll point that out again when we get to that slide. So next slide, please. This is the district, and you're about to see come in as we've looked at. Let's see. So all of the red dots are elementary schools, the blue dots are middle schools, and the green dots are high schools. So it's difficult. What do they say? You eat an elephant one bite at a time to deal with all of the schools at the same time. So we put this into rough quadrants. Sam, if you go forward. An area 1, area 2, 3, and 4. Now, that looks an awful lot like there's a line drawn, a solid line drawn down 3rd West, or if you're looking between 3 and 4, there's a line between, I want to say that's 13th South, and it's that time again. All right. So these lines are not, they're not hard lines, and I fully expect as this process moves forward that there will be movement between the areas, because it'll make some sense. So you see some elementary schools that are just north of 13th South and others that are just south of 13th South. It's going to make sense to move those lines in I keep using the word sense, in sensible ways. So these are simply to help us break this up for purposes of conversation.
Superintendent,
please.
And you read my mind, because I just want to make sure there's not an artificial boundary on 300 West, dividing the east and west side of our district, but also I want to make sure we acknowledge whether these boundaries are safety and traffic issues and how that will figure in. So if I'm a member of the general public and I'm following along, and I know that I don't necessarily want that artificial boundary on 3rd West, when would I expect to see a different map in terms of that flow chart that did acknowledge that these cuts changed? Does that make sense?
Yes. So first of all, consideration number 7 is student safety and safe walking routes. That's a piece of that. I mean, there are other pieces of that, like where different shelters are and so on, and we're going to have, but safe walking, transportation, those are issues that are just absolutely have to be considered, and you've built that into your policy because it makes sense to do that. As the process goes forward, and I didn't read all of the steps, I'm not sure if it's May or June or in August, that the options committee, and I can talk about that later, but the committee starts looking at, to solve this problem, and we're going to articulate the problem in just a couple of slides. To solve this problem, here's 4, 5, 6 different ways that this problem could be addressed. Those solutions would be when those pictures start coming up.
Perfect. Thank you.
So just looking now at area 1. Sam, next slide if you would. The elementary schools in area 1, you see them listed there: Backman, Escalante, Mary W. Jackson, Meadowlark, Newman, North Star, Rose Park. Go forward to the next slide. Here's the way we looked at this, and this is some really interesting information. So the total number of K-6 students enrolled in that Area 1 is about actually, when they ran it, it was exactly 2,300. Total number of K-6 students residing in Area 1 is 2,425. You may remember a couple months ago we had that chart that showed kids moving back and forth to lots of places. There's an awful lot of choice. Let me say that differently. There's a wonderful amount of choice going on, and you'll see that as we go forward. And that's, I think schools really are developing niches. They're developing programs and attracting. There's a lot of movement back and forth. But I think it's interesting to compare the enrollment number and the residential number. Now, you'll remember from the last board meeting, that presentation, we talked about the right size for an elementary school, and that presentation had 3 slides where we said that there's nearly universal concurrence that 3 teachers per grade level starts being a real sweet spot for schools to be able to offer all of the programs, kids to have options, teachers to be able to work with each other, teachers to be able to teach the same grade level many years in a row because they don't have to follow population bubbles, teachers not having to teach split classes. And I keep saying teachers, you recognize, I know, the impact that has on children and their education when they have these. So there are 3 pages of slides. You can refer to those, refer others to those, or I can give those to you. So if starting from this point of 3 teachers per grade level, if we do the math, say that's 550 students, looking at students that are enrolled in Area 1, 7 elementary schools, by the math, and I'm going to round up, by the math there ought to be 5 in doing the math this way. Let's go to the next area, Area 2. There are 5 elementary schools. Note Edison, Mountain View, Parkview, and Riley. They are K-5 schools that feed to Glendale Middle, and Franklin, somebody's got a K-6 and feeds to Bryant. Thank you. See, the expertise is just shining through already.
Right.
Bring that picture back up.
Yeah, jump it. We can have that be every other slide. Okay, so the next, or up in the corner of each one. All right, next slide. So looking at K-5, K-6, again, the enrollment, this is the K-6. If we go, again, notice in this area, enrollment and residential is much closer than it was in the previous one, but again, this area is attracting students in from somewhere. Yeah. So if we're looking at a K-6 school, then where there are 5, the numbers would suggest 3. Next slide. If we look at this same area, but K-5, given the 4 K-5 schools, the number goes, rather than 3, it rounds up to 4. So there's a little bit of a thought there that some of you may have noticed. If we were, this is a conversation for another day, perhaps. This is definitely a conversation for another day. If we had if all of our schools were K-5, we would have need for more buildings, which goes one way or the other. So moving on to Area 3, 7 elementary schools: Lynn-Benyon, Bonneville, Ensign, Liberty, Uinta, Wasatch, and Washington. There are 7. So the next slide. This is an area that appears to lose students, right? The enrollment number is lower than the residing number. And in both of these, K-6, there would be need for 5 elementary schools rather than the 7. This is just flat out straight doing the math. And Area 4, 8 elementary schools. Turn this page, look at this one. There's a nearly 500, there's a more than 500 student, am I doing that math right? There's a 550 student increase of residential to enroll. So they're recruiting 550 kids from somewhere. Now, as a former assistant principal at Hillside Junior High, it was Hillside Intermediate at the time, boy, we had an awful lot of kids from Evergreen that came. So these might be hundreds of kids that we're bringing in from Granite School District or from other places. But looking at this, so there's 8, and if we just run the numbers, if we run the enrollment numbers, it looks like 6 schools would be needed. If we do the residential numbers, it would look like 5 schools would be needed based on the numbers. So we have that map again, one more if you would, Sam. So this is back where we started. And so if we go to the next slide, let's call this part of the presentation section 1 of the discussion. We would recommend really studying all of the elementary schools in Area 1 for potential boundary change, including possible closures, and the same for 2, 3, and 4. I went through that really meaty stuff really quickly. We laid a lot of foundation. I'm looking for somebody to pull a microphone down. I'm not seeing it. So are there?
You know I would. Okay.
I wasn't even thinking that.
I know, I'm sorry. I just, and maybe this is a question, and you might know it. Maybe Sam would be the piper inner. So I'm going to just let's just look at 4, because that's mostly my schools in my precinct. So when you say that there's 2,700 residential students,
Yep.
right? I just want to understand how you came up with that number, because a couple scenarios are running through my head. You know, is it because they are a part of, at some point in time, they were a part of our district, so we had them and they've gone over, to another district, so we receive, funding, right? Or were they a part of our district and maybe they've chosen a different one? But what if they were never a part of our district, but they live in the city? That wouldn't be accurate number then, right? I mean, how do you come up with 2,700 kids?
That's a great question. You're now the 4th person drilling down hard on Sam to get the answer to that question, because I was the 3rd, Paul was the 2nd, and Alan was the 1st. So Sam, go ahead. About a charter school.
Okay, so that leads me to, is it okay if I ask my follow-up? Sorry. So going back to the dark years of the pandemic, I know in 2 of my schools that I know the history of that enrollment, and parents chose, to go somewhere else because of us being in remote. That's just the plain and simple facts. Some of it I can see where they've come back, but if they chose to go somewhere else, Sam, they would not be included in this number, or they would? They are not. Okay. They are not enrolled. Okay.
And okay. Christy, in the first 3 areas, when I rounded up, on the numbers, the number of schools needed based on the numbers, when we rounded up, in most cases that was pretty considerable. In area 4 specifically, 5.97 rounding up to 6, that's not a big jump.
Right.
Or 4.96 jumping up to 5, that's not a big jump. In the other ones, what was it, 5.03 or something jumping up to 6? That's being very generous. So these are precisely the kinds of questions, drilling down more into non-resident kids or non-enrolled kids and so on. That's the kind of stuff that's got to be studied.
That has to be studied and looked at. And I'm sorry, Brian, I'm probably going to be going down the rabbit hole a couple of times with you on some stuff, because that's just what my brain, and I'm not sleeping at night, so you're going to get the result of that. So Sam, thank you for that clarification.
Thanks, Sam.
So some of that attrition, it relates a little bit to what I see next in the packet, which is about some of those steps. So my question is about specialty programming, which is, we know there are many specialty programs, and we know that if Brian goes to an SCC, he will hear. So if he goes to Ensign, they'll talk about CNA. If he goes to Washington, they'll talk about IB and or their Magna ELP. And I think one thing that I am a little bit concerned about is understanding the distinction between a district program that will continue to be funded regardless of
Where it is.
FTE and where it is, and something that could go away. So if you go somewhere and you hear something really great about a program, but will that program actually exist by the time we're making our decision? So we're making a decision based on programs without knowing their status, if that makes sense. So we know that Magna ELP could move, but would it exist in the same numbers regardless of its FTE at a unique school site? And would the same thing be true for CNA or dual immersion or any other kind of programs that schools offer?
My answer to that question is to say that's a great question, and that's what's got to be talked through, and as we go down the policy path, there are times for considering those very things. So what I'm hearing you say is those are things that are important for you to consider.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, as I'm looking at the guy in the picture, those are really important things for us to consider, and I think we're now.
And
go.
could I just follow up that it does relate to what I asked Alan about earlier with FTE, that if people are seeing a significant dip this year, that would change how they offer specialty programming. I am a little bit, this is somewhat unrelated to this topic, but they all kind of connect. I'm worried about how it impacts the choices that we see so much choice. So like if I've done a lottery for CNA, for example, and the class that I'm entering changes, or dual enrollment can't staff a Spanish teacher anymore, like what, or not dual enrollment, you know what I mean, dual immersion. I wonder how these choices will change the numbers and how all of that relates to the process.
Yeah.
So it is a more general question of, you know, can there be district consensus or some kind of report on what is a district program and what have school sites chosen to do, and what's the obligation to parents who've choiced into them that impacts this?
I think that's actually a side of this. That's a really good question. Which programs that we have are district programs that the district has to provide services for children with disabilities, and so there are hubs and programs that are district sponsored, district FTE funded,
right,
in addition to whatever FTE allocations there were. That may also be true with the magnet programs, but you know what? Now I'm feeling really shaky because I don't know. And so that's something that we really do need to talk through. Which of these are district funded 100% programs? Which of these are district supported to some degree programs? And which of these are just flat out something that the PTA is funding and the district's not in it at all?
Right.
Those are great questions. I don't have an immediate answer for that, but I think that'd be helpful even regardless of this, because parents may be making choices to go to this school or to that school. They don't care who's funding it. It's just something great for their kids. And so these conversations are going to be unsettling all over the place, which brings us back to the beginning. We got to be sending people to the central place so that can be part of the study. Let me make a comment quick. This brings something else up. Small schools do not mean smaller class sizes, and large schools don't mean larger class sizes or smaller class sizes. Class size is that staffing ratio that we just saw. Class size is 1 to 25, 1 to 28, depending on the grade level you're in. Regardless, that's when I say class size. Staffing allocation is that. The smaller a school you have, the wackier that can actually be. So you might be allocated for a second grade a teacher for 25, but you've only got 17. And for 5th grade, a teacher for 28, but you've actually got 40. And that happens in a smaller school. In a school with more students, this is not about letting teachers go and jamming kids more tightly or less tightly. It's about moving classrooms to a location. That's the target of, that's this 3 teachers per grade level concept. It's not that class size, the number of kids in the room go up or down. Those can be very much the same as they are right now. It's a different
This
issue.
is unrelated. I've just had like a synapse firing.
Please.
Sorry if I made a face. To that end, I would add to this, in terms of specialty programming, Title I is not a specialty program, but we do know changing the population would change your Title I status.
It could,
So
yes.
that's something
Yes.
else that I would think is important to consider, that's in a different vein, but similar, that as
Yes,
things
absolutely.
are reconfigured, we would want to know how a school would be impacted by a decrease or an increase in Title I funds.
Yes. Though that decrease or increase speaks to the percentage of Title I eligible students.
Right.
So,
Sure, yeah.
which
Yeah,
is,
yeah.
yeah. So that brings us back to these, this is section 1 of the presentation, 1 of 3. So to the recommended actions, and it might be, this is to the pleasure of the board, we can go through sections 2 and 3, though those really have different, it's a related topic but different. Or if you chose to move these pieces to the action agenda and vote on them now, that might be helpful. But this is what's to happen in February, is that a study list is approved. This would be our recommended study list, which is study all of the things.
Martin, I get the sense that you're looking for some direction.
I can either continue on with the presentation, or you can...
I think let's just continue on.
Please, okay. All right, I will set that to the side because we're going to come back to that. So the next slide then, assuming you follow those recommendations or do something like unto it, March through May is assigned staff, that's Brian, would meet with school community councils, host community meetings to study the needs and impacts of potential changes, and a core set of options is then generated. That's the next step in this process if you approve a list to study. Section 2 now. I'm really too bad Ken left because this is important. I was not. Pardon?
Can I just ask, you said the SCC, Brian's going to be visiting. Did you say earlier that you were going to those two, that it was the superintendent and Brian?
No, it's or the designee. And
oh, okay.
And,
so
and,
you may be at some, or you're not going to be at?
I'm probably not going to attend the SCC meetings.
Okay.
If there are, and part of that has to do with the best time for me to probably participate, let me say it this way, the best time for the superintendent to participate, I think, is to go to open houses, which is later on in the process,
okay,
because that's where the public comes. That's in one of these blue sections. Thank you for that. All right, section 2. I don't know a lot of this history. I've learned of this, but I understand that in the 21-22 year with ESSER funding, the board established a 2-year pilot to determine the fiscal and population viability of an online synchronous elementary school. In the 21-22 school year, there were over 250 students. As you may have noticed, I looked on one of Alan's sheets. October 1 of this school year, there were 59. As of January 26th, there were 82 students. 62 of those were in-district students. 20 of those were out-of-district students. 12 of those had been enrolled since January 9th. My understanding is that of those 20 out-of-district students, some of those are even out-of-state students or lived out of state, which is its own issue. But so going on to the next slide, At the Salt Lake Virtual Elementary, there's a full-time site administrator. There are 9 teachers in special education support. There are 3 paraprofessionals, one of those special ed. There's a full-time office professional. There's a half-time librarian, half-time art teacher, half-time counselor. 2 quarter-time academic coaches. So total number of students is 16, and the teacher-to-student ratio is about 1 to 10. Actually, if there's 82 students and 9 teachers plus special ed, it's actually less than 1 to 10. So, because it's a pilot program, one might ask, why are you bringing this to the board? For some reason, this school got a state school number, and so now it's an official school as the state considers that, and so to make a decision with that school, we need to go through a certain legal process to close a school or whatever. And so under G5, and Christina, if you can make your way over and talk about G5 and this and how the policies apply here specifically.
So for doing a boundary study and a change like we were talking about before in section 1, we have extended a timeline that it goes well beyond the minimum statutory requirements. So that's about an 18-month process. In our administrative procedures in G5, there is a specific process outlined for our virtual schools. If the board chose to close them, we would be following the process outlined in statute, which requires a 120-day period. So typically how that would start would be, let's just suppose that perhaps the board chose to pursue the option of closing this. If the board chose to post notice to all the families affected tomorrow, we would move to 2 public comment periods. Those would be in May at your board meetings in May 2nd, May 16th. Then we would have to schedule a public hearing. We would provide 30 days notice of a public hearing, hopefully May 7th. And then another 10-day notice. We would post that on May 27th. You could hold a public hearing on June 6th. And then the earliest you could vote as to whether to approve the closure of the virtual program or not would be June 20th. So it's about a 120-day period, and that's how it's broken out. The first thing is posting public notice to anyone who would be affected. So those would be all the parents at the virtual school. And then it moves into those public comment, public hearing, board action. So that's what's outlined in our administrative procedures for an abbreviated process for closing a school that wouldn't have these boundary impacts, but would still comply with state law.
So you've just described the statutory minimum timeline.
Correct.
As opposed to the otherwise default G5 18-month timeline.
Which is an 18-month process. This is 120 days, but 120 days clearly in line with statutory requirements. So, and again, that timeline assumes that you took some sort of action to post notice now. It would just all back up, if you delayed any sort of decision, but it would be 120 days.
Sam, if you go forward 2 slides. One more. So our recommended action here in this section, thank you, Christina, would be to post the requisite notice proposing that the Salt Lake Virtual Elementary School not continue operations beyond the 22-23 year. That's this year, that it not continue beyond this year. Thank you. I'll continue on to section 3 of the presentation. This is like 2 slides. So study, keep going, Sam. Study of the fiscal and population viability of a 4th comprehensive high school. Board members, you're very aware that a number of community members, city leaders and others have asked us to look at. We had a letter from the mayor to this effect a couple of weeks ago asking us to look at the possibility, the potential of a 4th comprehensive high school. One of the one of the letters I think that we received from a couple of city council people earlier talked about Glendale High School and that they were designing the flags for the Glendale High School. So Sam, next slide if you would. That's the location. These are the locations of our existing high schools. Click it one more time. That circle there, that's Glendale. That's where really the population center of that Glendale area is. So looking at that, we would recommend, next slide, Sam, that you to authorize a fiscal and population viability study of a fourth comprehensive high school in that Glendale area. So those are, the last slide says thank you. So I'm holding three slides. Section 1 about the studies for elementary schools, Section 2 specifically to Salt Lake Virtual Elementary, and Section 3, a fiscal and population viability study of a fourth comprehensive high school.
Thank you, Superintendent, for the presentation. One of the things that I've always really valued about this process thus far is that we're centering students and their outcomes in the discussion and the decisions that we're going to have to make relative to their performance and their outcomes long term. So thank you for doing that. Board, we have a lot of recommendations in front of us, and I would open it up to some discussion about where we're at and how we're feeling about all of these. There's a number of ways we can go about it. It could be individually, or we could accept the recommendations as a whole, but I certainly want to hear what the board has to say first. I see Board Member Anderson and Board Member
Christy
Bing.
and I will go head to head for who wants to ask the most questions.
Probably.
I have two questions, one about virtual, one about Glendale. If we moved forward with posting notice, is there a reason why we couldn't continue offering virtual opportunities like we offer at Clayton, knowing that like the need for virtual learning might not qualify on paper for what we think of as a school, but may be a need people have? That's one.
The short answer to that's yes.
Okay.
Wait a minute. Is there a reason to not do that? No. Is that something that could be done? Yes. We'd need to look at that.
Right. But so it would not, if we chose to post notice, it would not be an abolition of virtual opportunities, right? It's
it does
just saying
not
a
need to
standalone
be an
school.
abolition. That's right.
Okay. And then the second question about the high school is the wording there says a comprehensive high school. Would the study push out other options that were not a comprehensive high school, meaning like the same size that we would expect from the other schools we have?
That is a great policy laden question.
My specialty.
Yes, thank you. The letters that we've received from community members and the conversations we've heard from community members, the argument that they press forward, which is I think a compelling argument, is that today there were some 1,300 students, high school students, that were bused across town to go there. Now, 1,300, as you may or may not recall from the previous presentation, 1,600 high school students is right about where you've got the critical mass to be able to offer all of the programs and not have so many singletons, not have too many singletons that kids can't take advantage of the programs. I didn't get the sense in any of those conversations or communications or letters that what they were asking for was a specialty school.
No.
But that they were asking for a, and I don't, this isn't to poke Slicksy in the eye or innovations in the eye, a real high school that lets kids have their own. They talked about their football team. One of the letters talked about their well, there's a reason Innovations and SLCSD don't have football teams. It's because they don't have the student body to be able to run that. So I have, and I'll own this, I have read between the lines that they were really asking for a comprehensive high school and not for a specialty program.
Thank you.
Mohammed and then Christy.
Great.
Thank you, and to your cabinets as well for this really, I appreciate it. It's really, it gives me a better idea, especially distributing it into quadrants. It gives us an idea. So, to the board here, you know, we all know we are like on time crunch here. Legislators are after us because, you know, of allowing so many schools to operate, and so there is some accountability going on here. And I personally would recommend that we move forward with the first recommendations of studying the elementaries. So we give that green light, so at least we know something is being processed as we continue to, like, you know, figure out other, at least get something rolling. Because, you know, pushing it so that we have 2 more weeks until we have next board meeting, and who knows what's gonna happen. So we're just gonna keep, you know, kicking the can down the aisle here. So, yeah, so I'd encourage you guys to consider us moving along with this and putting into action.
Thank you, Mohammed. Christy?
Okay, so I would like to see all of our high schools on that map. And I know that they're not all considered comprehensive high schools, but we support 3 other high schools. You know, even though SLCSD is a charter, it's still a dependent charter. And I think it's important to see those on that map and that they're considered in the conversation. Because I think that, as you've said, you know, if you want to have the full-blown, you know, at 1,600, you have to have 6,400 students total.
That's right.
In order to have 1,600 in each one. And we already know that our high school enrollment is going to start to decline a little. And so I would just like to be able to say, here are the 6 high schools that we currently fund or have some sort of financial tying to. I think that it's disingenuous just to have the 3, for me. Whatever the rest of the board thinks, but that's for me.
The map that had the, I see, yes.
Do you
I
see-
think, yes, yep. Setting the map aside for just one moment.
Right.
And the map speaks to the comprehensive high school issue.
It does.
The way you've just raised the question, you're absolutely right. The study without question need to look at all of our high school students that are our high school students in the district, wherever they attend.
Wherever they attend.
If the map showing only the 3 comprehensive high schools is somehow misleading, I apologize for that.
No,
But
right.
the absolute, in all of our minds, we've been thinking about, in terms of fiscal and population viability, looking at all of the high school
Right.
students wherever they attend.
Right. And so it's interesting to me that there are multiple people that I talk to, probably the board talks to also, other board members, that don't realize that Innovations exists.
Yes.
Because they didn't know that there was one there, you know, and that I know we've had conversations about really moving Horizonte to a different type of school. You know, so I just think if we could do that, I think it would be important to have all of them listed. The virtual elementary was obviously a significant investment, you know, for that pilot. And right now, it looks like they have, from what's on here, 94 students. Is that the current number?
The number is as of January 26th, and so that...
Because they had 12 more. The 9th they added like
Say that
12
again?
more.
82 on the... 80.
Oh, they have
Today?
80.
Okay.
So right now, I mean, as I look at this, I'm having a little bit of a constriction where I feel like the investment that we made, it's right now a school within a school because it's at Parkview, right? That's where they hold their...
Physically.
Yes,
That's,
physically.
Parkview is where many of the staff members.
Yes,
are
are at.
are
And that they
located.
will teach a class, right, from, is that right? Am I learning that right? They teach a class from Parkview. And I don't know if the conversation, is that right? It's a virtual class. It's a virtual class that they teach from Parkview. I mean, that's how it was designed,
Yes.
to set it up that way.
Yeah.
And.
It's like the
So-
anchor location.
Yes, thank you,
There we
anchor
go.
location. So I'm just wondering if there was a conversation as you looked at this recommendation that you're having, if there was a conversation around pulling those kids into Parkview. You know, I mean, Parkview right now, their enrollment is low, to provide, you know, to make them Parkview students and not Salt Lake Virtual Elementary, but still have that, as Ashley said, that online component, you know, for them. I don't know. Did you have that conversation?
This 120-day study contemplates those very questions.
Okay. So that leads me into the last one. As Mohammed has said, you know, to move forward and say, yes, let's study these areas. But the bullet points that we have, of the considerations, you've also heard multiple other considerations tonight. You know, whether it's about our additional programs, maybe students that, you know, that live in the city but aren't being counted, that I just want that also to be a part of the conversation.
Absolutely.
I just don't want it to be those bullet points only. And I would be fine with saying, yes, you know, let's move ahead with the elementary piece of it, but knowing that, you know, we need to look at the timeline and keep doing that. But I don't want to say yes tonight knowing that, or the thought of that's all we'd be looking at is just those bullet points that are in the presentation tonight, and that's all.
The bullet points in the presentation, remember, those are from your policy. Those
They
are,
are. They're
and
from
what I'd really encourage us to do over time is that as Brian goes to school community council meetings, that he comes back to the policy committee and says, you know what, you're missing 3 things that we really ought to have in G5. So it's not that we would only consider the 12 that are listed, but that we will consider all 15, and then as we go through the process, we'll amend the policy to include all 15. So I don't see
It being a hard and fast.
I don't see the 12 as being limitations, but as being ones that are specifically called out. And if we identify that there are others that ought to be specifically called out, we put them on the list as well.
So then my last thing is just a plea. A heartfelt plea.
Sure.
Is that going forward and saying, here, study this, that we need to know that there really is going to be, that these meetings are held, if we need additional meetings held, if we need additional, you know, support at the schools. They have a meeting with the school community council, but not everybody, whatever we need to do, that we go to the 10th, you know, to make sure that we are listening to our communities, that we're answering questions, you know, that it really is a superhero effort, which may mean that Brian might need some additional help because we can't clone him. And we have 27 elementaries right now. So that would be my plea, is that we would really make that effort to make sure that those meetings are done in multiple ways.
I agree with Christy in so many ways, because before G5 was developed, I think that was the spirit of some of the development of this policy. Number one, about how we decide on boundary changes and how it guides us and all of those elements. But you know, schools tell stories. Like they're more than just numbers on the paper. Not to minimize the presentation that you have, but they're a part of the fabric of our communities. And these were just 12 considerations that I felt like help us paint that picture. But then there's also the element of, you know, outside of these considerations that are a part of the process that help us tell that story, I feel like. And I just want to emphasize that I agree with Christy that you know, closing a school is personal. It's emotionally driven, and again, just to emphasize the more that we center students and their success, in these conversations and decisions that we're making, we'll have a better understanding of that through that storytelling and what we learn from the community, from Brian, from our school community councils, from students, from teachers, everybody involved. So I'm 100% on board with let's hear what those stories are and make sure that we allow that space to happen within this time frame to get that picture.
Just set my timer really quick. I very much have similar thoughts to things that Mohammed, Christy, and Nate have said in the last couple of minutes, and particularly something that Christy had said about maybe more support and help for Brian moving forward. Those are a lot of SCC meetings to attend, but I also, from my perspective and a lens of my precinct, I don't feel like constituents from my precinct are going to actually have the opportunity to voice their opinion in SCC meetings. I attend those regularly. I know they're not well attended, so I think we really need to think about other ways to get our constituent parents, students, teachers, whoever it may be, have their voices as part of that. That's something I'm really concerned about moving forward in this process, is that not just my precinct, but I'm thinking about my precinct that they're not going to be heard. So I'd like us to consider that as well.
Can I respond to that, because I know that's a concern. I would contemplate that that we hold not open houses at every school, but in every region, 2 or 3 perhaps, and we'd schedule that. But those open houses, that an invitation would be mailed in multiple languages to every household in the schools that are being invited, with the schedule of, if you can't make it to this open house, come to this open house, come to that open house, and the proposals would be discussed at those, because I think we look to school community councils for a lot of things.
Yep.
And they're not always the best body to get all of the information, and that would be what we would contemplate.
I think that sounds great.
To add on to that, and it might be a big ask, I hope it's not, but the value of childcare in these types of meetings is really, really important. And if we are holding them in schools and can set aside the funds necessary, I'm looking at Alan, to make sure that staff who are looking for some extra hours can participate and earn that extra pay, to make sure that parents who are super, super busy with their families have the opportunity to attend and participate in their students' education, and the future of it, I think, is also a huge value. But if it's possible, I would advocate for that.
And if I may just add one more thing, this is from a socioculture aspect, which is usually, we ask people to come to us. We say, we have this at this school, you come to us, instead of we say, to the community, where would you like us to come and introduce and talk to you about this? The reason I'm saying this is because within the marginalized communities and the immigrant communities, you do find some, undocumented immigrants who are like so hesitant of going into a government building and listening to something that's going to benefit their children. However, they'll feel much more comfortable if it is like held at a park, and then they will be able to be there and be able to voice their opinion. So you just think about this part of it as well. Thank you.
Thank you, and I want to center us back to the recommendations.
You haven't authorized us to do any studies yet, so let's talk about where we're
That's exactly where I was getting us to. I love and appreciate the values that this board has, and we're seeing that here tonight in the discussion. But we definitely have some direction that we need to give the superintendent, and we've already heard from Mohammed that he supports the recommendation of the first element that the superintendent presented. We've heard some discussion about the other two, but just in the interest of time and respecting our community's time with our discussion tonight in the meeting, I think I'd like to get us back to the recommendations and where we would like to see those go.
I would move that we accept the 3 recommendations from the superintendent.
Is that a formal motion?
Yes.
Okay, we have a motion on the table.
Second.
We have a second.
Can I ask for clarification?
Please, this is a discussion point.
I apologize.
It's okay.
When you say the 3, you mean all 3 sections, which
Yes.
there were 6. There were 6 recommendations. You're,
Of course there were.
in the 3, you're
I-
capturing all of them.
Yeah,
Okay.
correct.
Thank you.
Is there any additional discussion?
The only thing I would add to discuss my own motion, if that's permitted,
Yes, it
would
is.
be that I'm making that recommendation knowing that 120 days, we have to communicate with virtual elementary families and faculty.
Tomorrow, yes.
Yeah, and that past that point, that communication can include ways that virtual education, knowing that it's not a large quantity of students, but it's students we know will travel, for an opportunity like this, how we could serve them outside of the context of a standalone school, acknowledging some of the comments we've received.
Knowing my cabinet members, I can speak with some degree of confidence that study's begun already this evening.
Right, great. Right over there. Okay, thank you. So that's my only discussion that
They're thinking about it right now.
I'm moving this knowing that that's a value I have, and I respect the correspondence we had, and just want to acknowledge too that the virtual elementary faculty and staff who were here did have to leave before we had this conversation, but that their feedback was heard and is appreciated.
Thank you, Ashley. Any additional discussion to the motion? Seeing none, let's go ahead and start with a roll call vote. Starting with precinct 4, which is me. Nate Salazar, yes.
Mohammed, yes.
Ryan Jensen, yes.
Christy Sweat, half-heartedly, yes.
Bryce Williams, yes.
Jenny Sika, yes.
Ashley Anderson, yes.
That motion carries unanimously. Thank you, board, for the very thoughtful and meaningful conversation. I know it means a lot to everybody involved in our district and our community. The second item on our discussion agenda is the draft strategic plan for student achievement. I would invite Dr. Buendia up to the table.
Get the best for last. Now for a lighter discussion. Okay, well, thank you for your energy, and it's been a great discussion. So with that said, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, and I'm happy to have the board be able to direct me in any way if there are time constraints. I'm being respectful of your time, our community's time. We definitely want your feedback and opportunity to learn if you have anything that you want us to consider in changing the strategic plan. So what I want to do is first begin by anchoring the conversation with reinforcing this notion that the entire document is really undergirded by the board's priorities, formal priorities and preferred priorities. And so you have this cheat sheet, and this is just a sampling that I provided, right? And Dr. Hall created the beautiful graphic, so I won't take credit for that. And so I don't want you to think of this as an exhaustive list, but it certainly speaks to, I've heard the board say before, their equity priority, sustainability priority, safety priority, inclusion. There's a lot of that. So I'm giving you a cheat sheet for that. So as we begin, and feel free to stop me at any time to kind of be able to ask for me to move in a different direction. The way I'm envisioning tonight's discussion is to go section by section and ask, are there any changes or questions that you have within that pillar? And then pointing out, there's a section that is proposing that we have a steering committee. And so we'll start with that first, okay? So we're working on the format. So appreciate Dr. Hall's formatting proficiency. And both, and you all know that Dr. Hall and Christina Kendall are the editing gurus for this document. So if I can direct you to page 8. Oh, actually, sorry. Let me first begin with.
I think Board Member Jensen has it.
Before we go to page 8, can we look at page 7?
Yes.
Under mission statement, it says S
Yeah.
cultivate. Can you?
I changed it.
Okay,
It was
great.
just it was when I was, it was a complete typo. I was changing something and it deleted it. And so it is the current version
Okay.
has Salt Lake City School District spelled out the way it's spelled out under the introductory paragraph. So thank you for pointing that out. So with page 7, we introduced this, I think, at the last meeting, correct? So any questions, changes there aside from my clumsy fingers deleting it?
I wasn't pointing that out. I just wanted it to be clarified so that we have it.
Oh, yeah. And I'm trying to be lighthearted because
Okay,
it's
yeah.
been a long night.
Yeah.
Okay, so then when you go to section 8, I also discussed that we're really being informed in how we're drafting this with a true notion that this is a living document and we are committed to a culture of continuous learning and improvement. And so what I want to point out.
That was an act of God. I didn't.
At least it wasn't lodged in my direction.
Happened.
You guys keep going. I'll go get.
Okay, so I want to draw your attention to where it says, to facilitate this process, a Salt Lake City School District Strategic Plan Steering Committee will be formed to monitor the implementation of the strategic plan, reflect on its effectiveness, and make modifications as needed annually. Because the intent really is not to wait 5 years to revisit this document, but to revisit it every year and take a look at, did we meet our goals? If we didn't meet our goals, why didn't we meet our goals? Do we need to modify? Is it meaningful? It's really to really engage again in this culture of continuous improvement. Yes.
I got a little feedback on that since the last time you presented, Dr. Buendia, which is sometimes there's the impression that an initiative in the district office might not trickle all the way down to the classroom. So there's a really great program in here, but we don't know about it. And the suggestion was, is there a place to add a communication plan, or I can't use the word, like a column, right, in all the subsequent sections, where how will this be communicated all the way to a classroom teacher, as an example, so that they're aware of the services that exist. That's some feedback I got that applies to the whole.
And that's awesome feedback and definitely a need for us to consider. Thank you.
Thank you.
My question was, who is this steering committee? Who will make up the committee?
You all get to decide that with, collaboration with us. So I haven't really defined it.
Okay.
And I shouldn't say we have not defined it. We just feel that there's a need to have a steering committee. And so depending on ongoing conversations, and it would be great to have your feedback. Right now, it was a large group of people working on this, and then cabinet having leads in every area. And so one idea might be to have the leads and stakeholders. We had student voices, family voices, teacher voices. So it really, I guess in my, how I envision it is that it be a smaller group that's representing all the voices that need to be at the table.
Okay, that's what I needed to hear. When I saw steering committee, I wanted to know if the voices were okay.
Yeah.
So teachers.
You just can't have it be 100 people.
principals. Yeah, no, you can't. That's.
Yes, so all of those voices, and when you look at the acknowledgement page, you'll notice that we have parent voices, parents participated, students participated, teachers participated, administrators. There was a lot of voices represented. And so I know that we all, from cabinet and everybody that served on all the different committees, we're really committed to honoring, respecting, and inviting those voices to continue as part of the steering committee. However, it's, again, it's not my decision. It'll be however you direct us to move forward.
So I guess to me, we have to be really deliberate on this, because we can't have like 100 people on this, like you're saying, but it seems like if we had a representative from each of those different areas that you were talking about, because I don't know, I mean, if we've got a steering committee, I want to hear what their thoughts are.
Brian, you're making an excellent point, and I think it serves us well to highlight quickly this document is the board's, and you've heard this before, this is the board's opportunity to direct the district. Where do we want to go? Who are we? What do we believe? What do we value? This is, in that sense, the board's document. Much of what you see in this document as well is the beginnings of implementation and so on. And so it's really a mix document, because it doesn't make any sense to have the board say this is what we want and then a completely separate document, this is what it looks. So as a practical matter, it's combined together. I think if the board has strong feelings about the makeup of this committee or other sections, then we'd look to you to direct us specifically, or in adopting this, we like the direction you're going, keep moving forward with the implementation and give us reports back. So it's kind of a hybrid policy and implementation document at the same time. Your point's an excellent one.
Thank you. Page 9, we updated, oh, sorry.
Question from student board member Lydia.
I'm sorry, Lydia.
Just going along with that, I would advocate for multiple students to be on the steering committee, just because each student would have a different perspective.
And I would agree. We had a fabulous representation from East High and West High in our committee, in the Equity Pillar Committee, and just so important and insightful. Every voice, but it was awesome to have you there. We updated the graphic. And next page is next page, I'm just gonna skip through, if that's okay with you guys, because it's just a title page. 11 is a title page, and woohoo! The Educational Equity, Access, and Student Support section. So you've had an opportunity to read the document. We cleaned it up. It reads nicer. Are there questions, feedback? Or can we move on? You're good.
I think it looks great.
Okay, perfect. Woohoo!
Breathe.
All right, Lydia, that's thanks to you and all the students that you brought. Okay, so page 17 is the Student Achievement Pre-K-12 Transition. So that's a title page. All right, this section, same question. Anything to add? Questions, feedback? All right, congratulations. No, yeah, it's all right.
Okay, you've gotten a little bit ahead. I had a question over on page 13.
Okay, so back to, okay, equity. All right, yes.
Okay, it talks in there about enrichment activities, and every student is going to have an enrichment activity once a year. How is that provided?
Okay, so action step 1.
Elementary students will have at least one enrichment activity per quarter, excuse me.
And so each of the individuals who have helped create the action plans will have an approach, but what I can say to you is what we want to do is make sure that everyone has an opportunity to experience, for example, a STEM activity or a field trip, or at the very least. And so we want to avoid having a school unable to provide an enrichment experience, whether it's a STEM activity, a science fair, robotics, a field trip to the museum. We don't want them to be limited for any reason really. And so every student, our belief is, and oh, this is mine. I don't know why I'm looking to Tiffany. This is mine. So the belief is that we want every one of our students, regardless of their geographic location or their Title I, non-Title I status, or the kinds of programs that they're serving, that every student should have some kind of enrichment experience at a minimum. And we know that students are having field trips, but we want to make sure that everyone is committed to having every student experience that, regardless of where they live, what school they attend, what language they speak, just making sure. Did I answer your question?
You have in a sense, but I guess the reason that I am focusing on this, because as I look at it, it also, I mean, there's the one enrichment activity per quarter, there's create and offer differentiated MTSS professional learning for teachers. Then there's increased and consistent delivery of academic and behavioral interventions. Speaking from my past experience as a teacher in the classroom, I just want to know how all of these things get implemented, because one of the things that ends up happening is, and I think these are, wonderful, laudable things, but then the teacher is supposed to implement all of these things, and they're thinking, how do I do all of this? So we've had prior discussions about how we've got to figure out how to retain teachers and how to encourage teachers to come. I think these are, like I say, laudable, but I also want to have some sort of sense of how does it really get implemented? Because when I hear behavioral interventions or academic interventions, I immediately start thinking, okay, is that something that I as a teacher am now going to have to figure out how to provide that? And I'm just telling you, those teachers are going, I'm overwhelmed.
No, and we completely get it, and trust me, even though I haven't been in a classroom in a long time, I still remember fondly my years teaching at the elementary level. And so what I will say is these are not going to be burdens on one teacher alone. It's the responsibility, the collective responsibility of the school to create a system to support one another to make it happen. And so, as an example, when I was teaching a third grade class back when the dinosaurs roamed, my third grade teachers and I worked together to figure out the best approach possible to deliver instruction in a way that made the most sense. We could provide interventions. We planned our enrichment activities in a way that was based on our levels of expertise and comfort, right? And so it's us partnering. So it definitely not doing two, but partnering with teachers and schools to make this happen. And so there are definitely more details. And so what I will say as well is what we're trying to do when we're talking about implement criteria, create and offer differentiated MTSS professional learning for school faculties, teachers, and administrators. That's Emily Sutherland's approach to individualizing it according to teachers' knowledge and expertise and experience, so that they're not getting a cookie cutter model of what they don't need. And then again, working with the school to figure out how do we create it so it doesn't overwhelm teachers more than they already are overwhelmed. So we definitely have that in our heart and minds, because we know, I mean, going through the pandemic, we heard very loud and clearly how stressful it was, which is part of the SEL priority is also focused on adults and self-care. And so that we haven't given that up. And so that's something that we definitely will make sure. And some of the, so for 5 real quick, and I'll try to be concise because I know, you know, I'm limited on time, but I feel really like I really have to address it to reassure you that we are taking seriously into consideration, and not just teachers' needs, but school faculty needs, administrators, classified staff. So,
yeah, and Brian, I think your question is a perfect one, right? And the concern and the reality of your experience in the classroom. And I think to take that a step further, if I can, Dr. Bundia and Superintendent and Business Administrator, correct me if I'm wrong, but even what we have discussed, you know, since you joined the board relative to our working relationship with these fine individuals that represent our administration, we are also one of those partners, right? That sets the expectation that Alan, you know, connects the budget to, and making sure that where those concerns are, if it's in personnel, if it's in funding the trips or the enrichment activities, you know, it's our role and our partnership at this table and at our level to make sure that that burden is less, ideally, in the implementation element of it. So.
Well, I really appreciate hearing that. I mean, it was just a year ago that I was in the classroom, and it's overwhelming. And when you're talking about, I mean, yes, we were meeting in our, Martin has said it's best to have 3 teachers, okay, so the 3rd grade team, the 2nd grade team, we're there, we're planning, we're figuring out, okay, the extracurricular activity, the field trip, but then you've got to figure out how are you going to pay for it? You've got to figure out, okay, then there's the intervention. I mean, there's just, we're asking the teachers to do an awful lot, and I just want to make sure that we're supporting them in the implementation of what we're
and
talking
one of the
about.
beautiful things, again, which is why I love the model of creating a culture of continuous learning, is we get to come back every year and receive feedback and have you all be able to say to us and have conversations with teachers and other stakeholders to slow it down a bit, pull it back a bit, and to be that's the beauty of how we're shifting the paradigm for how we are using the strategic plan. So that's, I just want to remind you that that's a safeguard that we have in place. And so when I'm here before you, next, you know, bring you up to speed on how we're going with implementation year 1, it'll be an opportunity to say, okay, you know, we've heard from our constituents, it's going too fast, it's not going fast enough, and then making the modifications. That's why it's a living document. So I appreciate that, and hopefully that'll help anyone who's out there thinking, oh my goodness, so much more. It's year 1 is, you know, an implementation year. We'll be getting feedback, and we'll be able to make modifications along the way.
Well, thank you. I mean, when a teacher hears PBIS and when they hear all of these things, they start going, oh my gosh.
And, yeah. And so I want you to keep in mind as we're moving, I've highlighted areas that, you know, we're doing, you know, SEL, equity, literacy. All right, so we went on to the student achievement pre-K-12 transition. I think it was good, right? Okay. Moving forward. The next one is our family, school, and community partnerships. and communication. So, feedback, questions? We good? Perfect. Woohoo! Hey, ladies, we did a great job. And thank you, team, the larger group of individuals that worked with us on this. All right, so then page 31, learning environment, stewardship, and sustainability. Same question. Feedback, questions, all good? Yay! All right, just really briefly, we have page 37 through 38, identifying our support system, right? So policy and legal services, research and evaluation, technology, instructional technology, budget and finance. So we have that there, so everyone knows. We have an implementation summary. So what we did for you is we just pulled all the action plans and put them neatly for you in a year one list. So same thing, just an easier way to read it. We came up with a glossary. I didn't get a chance. So the glossary was initially really long, but then we went back and really spelled out the acronyms. And so then we were able to shorten the list. So clearly it looks kind of awkward, and we'll make sure that it moves over. It'll look prettier, I promise. The acknowledgement of our committee members, you can see we had a lot of voices. And I will say that the learning environment, stewardship, and sustainability, I don't want you to judge them because they have a shorter list. They were the newest group, if you recall, when we consolidated our pillars from 9 to 4. So a lot of people jumped ship and came over to equity and academic. Hey, we're the funnest people. I'm just joking. You guys are awesome. And then, of course, ending with, our statement. So that's, this is
Sandra,
what I have for you.
What's the next step then?
So the next step is to finalize it. So if you're good with it, then we will finalize it and get it in its proper format so that we can present it to you next month for approval.
Go ahead.
Uh-oh. No, it's good. And it's more of a question, towards Alan too, is that, so as this all comes together, Alan, and of course we want it all tied to the budget, so is that a part of what we'll be seeing is the student achievement plan next to the budget to be able to see how we're going to move forward?
You'll see a first attempt, as we have two big documents that are being developed at the same time, and kind of get, so you'll see first attempt with this year's budget, and then a continual improvement with subsequent budgets to really hone in the presentation on meeting the goals set forth in this plan.
The goals set forth. Perfect.
So we'll be happy to receive feedback when we present this year's budget plan on how you'd like to see it different for the next year.
Thank you, Sandra.
You are very welcome.
Thanks,
I'm just writing notes.
Well, I had one question that might add a third layer to the budget, and very similarly to what I asked Emily earlier. Bryce and I and the board are thinking about a retreat, and either a few things could come out of that. We either readopt our priorities and our goals that we have set forward with SEL and literacy, but there could be the potential that we might have new board goals. How do you see us being able to fit potentially new board goals into this document? Do you have any thoughts or hesitations or advice about us complementing I would personally want to complement the strategic plan with our board goals, and would love your and everybody's participation in that when we get to that point, if we get to that point. But just wanted your thoughts and feedback on how that might play out and what that might look like from your end perspective.
And I in no way want you to think I'm faking my excitement at how excited I am that we are switching our paradigm with how we engage in the development of this document.
Okay.
And so, the opportunity when you go to your retreat and you have this to reflect on, it's when you come up with if and when, because I suspect, it's like Emily pointed out, our goal for the SEL priority was to create a framework. Well, we've gone beyond that. So it doesn't make sense to have that as a framework, right? And so if it's something more robust around that, it would be easy to integrate. If it's something that's different, I would suspect, because this is really written based on the priorities that you've expressed to us over the course of its development, that it would be interwoven and pretty easy to integrate as well. And and you'll hear me say this and say this again, aside from I'm excited about the paradigm shift, I'm also excited about the fact that we are really going to actualize this notion that it's a living, breathing document that can be modified along the way.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Bundia. Any other thoughts? I get the sense and belief that Dr. Bundia would love some assurances about moving forward and finalizing the document with the teams that put this together. I'm, for one, in support of that and would love to see this work move forward. Any other thoughts?
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to our last discussion agenda item is our board committee assignments. We just need to finalize a couple of things here. And I had April make some hard copies of it, and maybe Sam could pull it up as well. Jenny, would you mind? I think your phone is underneath. And we can also. Yeah. Exactly. And really, this is one of the.
You need one?
The final times that we might need to do this, at least until we have new committees or what have you, or need to adapt. But Mohammed, with your being out of the country, visiting family, there was
we had you written in everywhere.
Yeah.
When
Talk
you're
about
not
this
here,
one more
Mohammed.
time.
Yeah. But there are a couple things that we just need to finalize. I know we talked about this briefly at the Capitol yesterday, but the Traffic Safety and Transportation Committee. I know you have a very strong passion for that, and if you'd like to remain on that, I'd be happy to step aside and. Okay, so that's.
You can take my place,
Are you serious, Chris?
Yeah. You go right ahead.
All right.
Well,
Or Brian, I know that.
What I was going to say is, as I looked at these, Christy and Bryce, you have quite a few assignments.
Yep.
And, I was willing to say if I need to take one for Christy or Bryce or something, I was looking at like the charter school boards. You're both on that one and you both have 5, but maybe you two really, are excited about that. All I was trying to say is if you needed me to take another, I would do that.
Okay. In that same vein, would you want to take on a role with the Traffic and Transportation Committee?
If you would like me to do that, or if you want to do that, I'm happy to defer to you. I'm not trying to take more on.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to do is say if it would help someone.
Okay. And then Christy, I'm sensing that you would like to take a step aside.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then, so, are we talking about assignments right now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Salt Lake County Rec Board, we need to make a decision about that, because I need to come off of that, and that's an appoint. So what we would do is, Dr. Bates would send a letter to Martin Jensen and identify who we'd like to
The new
have
version would be,
to
yeah.
put on.
Okay.
Right. But my caveat is I think we need to have some direction
Yeah.
as to what that role really is, because none of us really just want to go to a meeting to go to a meeting.
Sure.
So what is that role, for us to be participating on that board?
In that same spirit too, Christy, I would be happy to take that on and get that squared away for our board and pass that on in the future.
Is on, usually they meet during the day, so it's on Wednesdays from 1 to, well, they might change it. So it's on Wednesdays usually. And it has been virtual, but I don't know if they've moved to an in-person or not. So you could maybe have the superintendent call
I have
and
that
ask about it,
Okay.
before we fill somebody in, or temporarily put you there for right now,
Okay.
if that works with your
It
schedule.
would work, yeah. And then, Brian, how about we move you into that traffic safety and transportation committee, if you're willing to take that on?
I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
Is that helping Christy or is that helping Bryce?
I think it's helping the three of us.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's 3 for 1.
So for traffic safety and transportation committee, it'd be Brian, Mohammed, and Bryce. I'll take on the rec appointee and work with the superintendent on developing that role and sharing that with everybody. Let's see here. And then the other one, just for you, Mohammed, is the Human Sexuality Education Committee. This is a committee that Dr. Hall runs for the district. It is, written in our state code that we have to participate in that and approving curriculums and everything like that. Bryce has expressed an interest, and we thought that you might have an interest in that as well. I'm not sure if Bryce is happy to step away, if that's something that you want to take on, or if you want to.
I could, how about this? So I do see that there is representatives to city council meeting. There is one that's needed there, the third person. So I could take that and let Bryce, you have the human sexuality.
Well, and that third spot is a little something we need to discuss a little bit more.
Okay.
Because the thought is that one of the RDA designees, either Christy or Ashley, would take that third spot.
I see.
Just based on the structure of how those meetings have gone in the past.
Mhm.
And so I would leave that to Christy or Ashley if they wanted to talk to Mohammed or work with Mohammed on that responsibility. But just for your fair,
Okay.
being honest
I
with that.
appreciate that. Thank you.
Maybe a cleanup of the description of the
Okay.
representatives to city council meetings. It's not really to approve RDA
Yeah.
budget, so that just needs, I think if you look
Copy.
back, Nate, you'll be able to see a description of one of our past ones that you can fill in right there.
Right. Thanks, Christy.
And so can you tell us a little bit more about what you found out about this new RDA designees for Ashley and I?
Yeah, I would probably have Alan give that description.
Okay.
Basically, with I'm forgetting the acronym, TEF?
Tech.
With that, it's no longer in state code that they go through that process to approve. That's the 10,000-foot view that I can remember off the top of my head. Alan would have a better explanation.
Maybe Ashley can help me if I get it wrong. But basically, the information we got from the RDA president or chief
Danny.
from Danny
Director.
is that they don't meet unless they're proposing a new project.
Unless it's a new project. Yeah, that's what my
And I had asked, I think, some follow-up questions about that because of how it's written in code, but I think we have the answer that moving forward, it's not the same, but there's maybe still some questions about what about these incomplete projects from me, at least.
I think that's.
So we could talk
would
about
be-
that in this capacity together.
Yeah, capacity, yeah,
Yeah.
so do we need to have us identified as RDA designees as a separate thing, or can you just move Ashley and I into that number 3 spot on the city council? Does it need to be separate?
I think we settled that it does need to be separate.
And if they ever propose a new one, then that would be separate.
Right.
That makes, okay,
Yeah.
that makes
So then we can
sense.
talk more about that too, like
Yeah.
what does that look like and
What does that look
how do
like?
we want to
Yeah.
do the other part?
That sounds great to me.
Thank you.
So Mohammed, moving back to
Yeah. So
human
to-
sexuality.
Yeah, so I'm I'm a father of very strong feminist daughters, and this is a very, important, to me. But I'm also, very flexible if Bryce is interested.
I will share, I've already done some of the work with the committee. We've met already, and I'm kind of interested in it, but if you have a strong passion, I'm willing to step aside.
I can always learn from you, what you learn.
I'm happy to do that. There's lots of learning there, that's for sure.
So,
Do you want to take that on?
Sure,
Okay.
I'm fine, yeah.
Nope, you're okay with that, Bryce?
Yeah, that's
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good.
Well, I think those were the big things that we needed to discuss with this document to finalize it. I don't.
So are we going to put somebody into that third slot?
I think that third slot would be one of the two designees
Yeah.
for that third
And
spot.
my question would be, do we need to vote on this tonight and make a formal decision about it?
I don't
Or
think
this
that-
just lives and we keep talking about it
I think
and
it
plug it
just
in?
lives.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could then I request that we have Danny come and give us an update of what's happening with the RDAs, and where they're at, and if they do have any new projects, obviously he would know that.
We'll get that
But
on.
that was a really great booklet that he brought a couple of years ago.
And I know in the conversations and correspondence that Alan's had that Danny's confirmed that he's more than happy to do that.
That would be great.
Okay. Perfect. Well, I believe that finalizes our discussion agenda and the agenda as a whole, except for some reports. So I'm looking for, here we go. And so Superintendent, do you have a report that you'd like to give tonight?
Yeah, just a couple of things. First, Ashley alluded to this earlier. Board members, you'll recall better than will I. A couple of years ago, there was a significant loss of students, equivalent to 70 some odd teachers, and rather than ratchet down our teaching force all at once, we went a little bit more than halfway, and so then this year we're still subsidizing some 30 teachers across the district. With the staffing allocations that were sent out last week, you may have been hearing from folks, those staffing allocations, those last positions have now been or will be eliminated. Attrition is going to take care of all of that. I don't see anybody losing a position or losing a job. But then Ashley, kind of to the question that you'd asked before, that's not something that will continue into future years. That balance sheet has been balanced and won't be an issue any longer. So that's just one thought. Second thing, the superintendent search survey update. We're hearing from a lot of people, which is neat. We're not hearing from very many students, and we were worried that Lydia is going to kill us tonight. But let me talk about what happened there. As we discussed this at the last board meeting, there was conversation that went back and forth about sending the link directly to students or to students through their parents. And although there was some discussion about, well, we could treat secondary students different, high school students differently than we do 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, the last comment that was made, and we had different recollections, so we actually pulled up the tape and listened to it. The last comment that was made was that students would only receive access to the survey through their parents. So as of this morning at 8 a.m., we've had 28 students respond. 2 weeks from tonight, Richard Stoll will be here talking about how to put the posting together and some of those other things. So if we wanted to, Tiffany assures me she could hit play and send that out to all of our high school students directly for a week, and then which means clearly 2 weeks from tonight we'd have all of that together. But we didn't want to presume to do that without talking to the board because there were feelings about sending this directly to students. And so, I guess that's our report, and if there's interest in expanding that to students, we'd be pleased to send that, but I didn't want to do that without mentioning it to you. That's not something you really need to vote on, but I guess kind of look at you and say, would you like us to send that to students this evening? High school students, pardon?
Yeah, because we're getting low participation surveys.
No, but we wouldn't extend it for adults.
We have extended it for adults. We talked with a couple of you at the.
Yeah, it ended today though.
Okay. Yeah.
So
So
did
adults
a week extension.
Adults have had it for nearly a month. 3 weeks, 4 weeks? Almost 3 weeks.
We did extend it for an additional week. My concern about continuing that one for an additional week would be the open comment box has to be read and trend analysis
Right.
has to be performed on it. So we think we can scoop up quickly the high school students into that, but if we left it open, we'd have to do all that in the open. And so we're just trying to balance between getting it to on the 21st and still including some students.
Superintendent, I do have some hesitation without it not being on the agenda, and I'm wondering if there are, throughout the course of the rest of the process, for us to be a little more creative about how we engage students.
Okay.
I don't know how you feel about that with the rest of the board, but definitely maybe something that we talk about in coordination with Richard when he's here in a couple weeks. That's kind of my feeling on it.
Students as well are good too.
And not to minimize the importance of it again, but yeah, I worry about that element of it.
That's reasonable.
Very good.
Okay.
We've done it the way that you'd asked us to do it, and we just want to make sure that was really what you meant for us to do, and so we've done. So we're good. That's my report.
Okay.
Thank you.
Perfect. I would open it up to board members if you all have any reports.
I have a few things I want to say. There's always so many good things happening, and then I know it was late, but I did get to go this week to Wasatch Elementary for their town meeting, which is the BTS dance specialist does a performance, and also youth theater creates essentially a play for different grade levels on different months, and this particular performance was about saving the Great Salt Lake, and it included visual art, and part of it was performed today at the Capitol building. It was just absolutely incredible. And I also wanted to congratulate the West High Arabic debate team on their recent championship, and the students from Ensign, Wasatch, and West in Precinct 3 who are advancing to the regional science fair next month.
So thank you, Ashley. Brian?
Well, I wanted to include that in my report. I mean, Kristen Bonner, she's the science teacher at Indian Hills, and she has done an incredible job coordinating that whole thing for the district. And it's really exciting. There's going to be 45 elementary students, 10 middle school students, and 20 high school projects that'll go on to the regional fair at the University of Utah. And I think this is exciting to see that we're moving out of the pandemic and we're able to do some of those things, and that those are a lot of work. I've helped with those as a teacher, so I really want to thank her. And when we talk about Wasatch, and I know that we have used up a lot of time, I really think it is important to celebrate what our accomplishments are. We need to, that's one of the things that, I mean, Christy and I have talked, that you have mentioned this, that we've got to promote our successes so that people really are aware. And I mean, Bonneville Elementary, they were recognized nationally as a school that is a top school, and those are things that are really exciting for our district, I think. I wanted to commend them.
Thank you, Brian. Christy?
I'll let Bryce go first.
Another science fair comment. Had the opportunity to judge a couple rounds of those, and the students that we have in our district are absolutely amazing. There were concepts I couldn't even comprehend, and that's kind of a bad thing as a judge, but just fantastic job.
Thanks, Bryce. Christy?
I just want to recognize the effort that goes into going to our joint legislative committee meetings. the work that Yandri does, the superintendent and Alan, and then all of you that have been able to come. And please, like the superintendent said earlier, please come, when you have an opportunity. I think that it's engaging, and I hope that Brian's enjoying it as much as I enjoy it. So it's last week we ended up on the back row, but we found microphones anyway. So I just wanted to say thank you, for participating in that. I think it's really important that Salt Lake has a voice, in this legislative session. I too feel the same way that Ashley and Brian have just said, and I'm sure, as Bryce said, there's so many great things that are going on. And, at some point in time, I'd love for our board to really talk about, how do we promote better? How do we talk about the things that we've made investments in? And, Alan touched on it this afternoon. And then we hear, from Emily that this great investment that we've made around SEL, and that we're one of the few in the state. We need to promote ourselves a little bit better and talk about the things that are going on in our schools.
Mohammed or Short and sweet. We love it. Mohammed?
Glad to be back. Miss my family back home, but back to reality. So, and it was so great actually going up to the Capitol and being able to rub shoulders with some politicians out there. Well, we are politicians too, with legislators out there, and just building that bridge is very important. And to all the minorities, the blacks, I want to wish you all a happy Black History Month. And encourage everyone to go and learn more. Don't forget about CRT.
Got it. Thank you, Mohammed. Mine is just a thank you for everybody. Really enjoyed participation on USBA Day on the Hill. I was really excited. I was able to go for a little bit in the afternoon and meet with our legislators. I also want to give a shout out in the spirit of celebrating successes, and also a thank you to Dr. Brie De Leon and Whittier. I had the chance to go read to a class there, and just brilliant kids, very inquisitive. I got questions about, do I know where one of the kids' grandma lives versus what I like to do for fun, and then of course just a lot of questions about what we do as a board, what the superintendent does. They thought I was the president of the United States and not the president of the school board, so that was also fun trying to explain that. But just really, really cute kids, and also just to celebrate the work that Bree and her assistant principal and the teachers are doing there. I believe Bree said that they've reached 9% growth academically in the school, which is significant, and so they're doing really good things there. And just want to thank everybody for the opportunities that we all have to participate in our students' lives and their education. So I guess with that, I'll call the meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody. I do that
Thanks,
for
you
practice.
guys.
Nobody else.
You've all got the same email from the same virtual elementary parent. We'll take care of it. You don't need to
Oh,
forward
all
it to
right,
me.
you'll
I've got it.
handle it?
Martin, you can't leave quite yet.
I'm not going to. Yandri, Brian, and Christina, can I chat with the three of you?
Kenny. Yeah, me and you.